Chapter 1: Keys and Plans. By the time the driver turned through the rusted gateposts and the hedges swallowed the road behind us, I had read the non-disclosure agreement 3 times and stopped pretending the clauses were normal. No mapping devices after sunset. It said in the same tidy type that forbade interviews, photographs, and unnecessary demolition. No opening unregistered doors alone. The paper smelled faintly of toner and lemon oil, the way expensive rules do, and above the signature line someone had handwritten, with a fountain pen that enjoyed its own ink, "We are grateful for your care, Ms. Reed." "I'm not a caretaker," I said before I could be polite about it. "Everyone here is, until they're not." The driver replied, eyes on the narrow, climbing lane, voice a baritone that understood why I had flown across the country on 20 hours' notice to stand in a house I had written about in footnotes for 10 years. "It's the hill," he added, as if apologizing for the incline and everything at the top of it. "Makes people edit themselves." The mansion waited where the road stopped pretending to be public, a long, low composition of limestone and glass that caught the last light and held it without letting any out, a trick I had admired in photographs and resented in person, because there are buildings that invite you and buildings that read you, and this one, Mercer House, Harrow House, the Palinode, depending on which article you fed, had always been rumored to do both. The roofline slid like a hand across the slope. The windows were not windows so much as decisions cut into the facade. The famous ribbon stair sat visible through the north curtain wall, like a vertebrae no one had the nerve to hide. Elias Mercer himself met me at the door, tieless, tan in the manner of men who test themselves against yachts. Iris is the color of old copper. The handshake was briefly warm and then efficient. The eye contact lingered 1 beat too long, not predatory, practiced. "Ava Reed," he said, making my name sound like a threat with good manners. "Your paper on negative space changed the way a certain magazine pitched this house to our insurance underwriters. I mean that as a compliment." He glanced at the NDA still in my hand. "And as a confession, your lawyers were thorough." "My lawyers are frightened," he said easily. "There's a difference." He stepped aside. "Come in before Bulmer decides you're a draft." Bulmer, it turned out, was the house manager, a tall woman with a bun so severe it had a politics and a cardigan that had outlived an empire, who took my bag as if it were guilty and set it on an antique bench I was not allowed to name. "Welcome, Ms. Reed," she said. "We've put you in East 3. There's a kettle, but if you prefer coffee, you'll have to make peace with the machine and its feelings. Mr. Mercer would like to tour you through the condition issues before dinner. I would like to tour you through the fire routes before he ruins your appetite. The house is fully sprinklered," Mercer said, a little nettled. "The house is fully itself," Bulmer replied, which answered everything and nothing, and moved us along a corridor paneled in smoked oak and inlaid with a rhythm of narrow, unlit niches that felt, to a person who notices proportions for a living, like a metronome placed beside a pulse. I had memorized the plan long ago, an H-shaped arrangement around 2 courtyards, a service spine hiding behind polite doors, galleries spoked off an atrium, a study with the rumored hidden stair the architect, Lor Voss, had always denied, and her devoted enemies always swore she cut late at night, after the client had fallen in love with the wrong part. But the house is built and the house is published are always cousins, never twins, and within 10 steps I could feel where the real building had asserted itself over the drawings like a person correcting a story in the telling. The corridor was a hair longer than it should have been, the corner a breath shallower, the light from the clear story falling not where the plan promised, but where the floorboards had learned to expect it. We stopped before a sheet of hand-troweled plaster so pale it made Bulmer look like a sepia photograph. "Do you see it?" she asked, and when I failed to answer quickly enough, Mercer rapped his knuckles, lightly, on the wall, and the sound came back wrong, as if it had a pocket behind it. "Hello," I ventured. "New," she said. "As of Tuesday. It wasn't new on Monday." Mercer gave a small, impatient shrug. "There's always settlement, Ava. It's a hill. We get a hairline, a carpenter sulks. Bulmer enjoys making a ghost of it for the staff." Bulmer kept her hands folded. "There was no seam on Monday," she repeated. "On Tuesday there was a seam. On Wednesday there was a keyhole below eye level. On Thursday there was a key, in the bowl in the foyer labeled, in a hand that is not mine, for MS Reed. You labeled a key for me.
I did not, she said.
I would not conspire with a house. She reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a slim brass key tied with a piece of gray grosgrain. She did not hand it to me. She set it on the narrow ledge of the plaster, as if feeding a creature you don't want inside your sleeve. The bow had been engraved with the simplest possible question. A.R. Mercer was watching my face, not the key. He enjoyed it when people believed what he had learned to live beside. You see why we keep the police out of the housekeeping, he said, almost cheerful. They make everything into a uniform. He pointed at the seam with 2 fingers the way proud owners point at cars. You're here to catalog what's wrong with my house. This is one of the things wrong with my house. Do I have your attention? You don't need a consultant. I said before caution could get a word in. You need a priest. Bulmer has already tried 2, he said. They preferred the wine cellar. The Grand Tour did what Grand Tours do. It pulled my attention through generosity until I had forgiven the part that wanted to be admired. The long gallery ran the length of the south wing, a corridor of restrained glare with paintings hung so low the frames grazed the tops of the chairs. The kitchen was an expensive laboratory that somehow still smelled like bread. The library had been designed by a woman who understood how light prefers to fall on the unrevised part of a sentence. Everywhere, the woodworking was immaculate, and everywhere the wood itself seemed to listen when you stopped talking, which is a skill I try not to attribute to lumber. We ended in the study, Mercer's favorite room to be seen in oiled walnut, a desk that had learned to accept papers as a compliment, the famous ladder that slides along the west bookshelves and makes men who do not read pretend to reach for spines. On the north wall, a square of plaster had been cut last year when a pipe burst and left to cure without paint, a pale, honest wound in a room that did not enjoy honesty. We learned, Mercer said, that even houses with names have urinary tracts. You can write that down. I'm not here to write, I said. You're never not writing, he said, and he was right, which is the trouble with paying women like me to look at your house. We don't know how to turn it off. Dinner in an hour, he added, already halfway through his emails, already halfway to a conversation he preferred to this one. Bulmer will give you the routes. If you get lost, ask the glass. It's better at directions than the staff. I did not get lost. I let myself be taken, past the atrium where a mobile of matte brass shapes held its breath, across a courtyard planted with clipped yew and a single blackened wisteria that Bulmer called the mistake, up the narrow servant's stair to a landing where 3 doors misbehaved by not being where the plan told me they should be. East 3 had the decent bed and the indecent window, the kind you can see out of without anyone being able to see in, which is only indecent if you are used to being watched. On the little writing table, a fountain pen, a heavy piece of paper with my name embossed at the top, a card with the house Wi-Fi, and, taped under it at the bottom edge like something not supposed to be in the photograph, a hand-cut scrap of tracing paper with lines sketched in charcoal. It was an elevation, simple, almost childish, of a wall with a keyhole below eye level and the notation, in tiny Roman capitals a certain generation of architects used like prayer. MS Reed, test. I folded the scrap and put it in my pocket because someone wanted me to carry it. At the end of the corridor, beyond the fire door Bulmer had recommended as a route, and I had silently rejected because the stair beyond it broke the rhythm of the house, the plaster seam waited, paler now in the more forgiving light, the key on its tiny sill looking less like a threat and more like a courtesy with teeth. Dinner was what rich houses make when they know you will talk better with salt on your tongue. Roast chicken that apologized for nothing, a salad that forgave me for flying coach, wine Bulmer poured as if she were measuring a sentence. Mercer ate fast and talked quickly about a potential sale, about a foundation that would protect the house from sentimentalists, about the original drawings that Lord Voss had never released, and which he insisted were somewhere on the property, because men who own things prefer their myths bound. Near the end of the meal he asked, casually, who I had told I was coming. No one, I said, which was not quite true. My friend Inez had a text that read on a hill with a house that believes in itself. If I stopped replying, Bulmer did it. I am allowed my jokes. He nodded as if pleased I was learning. You should know, he said, buttering a piece of bread he had no intention of eating, that the house reveals features when we entertain. We have not entertained this week. It is possible it is lonely.
Features, I said.
That seam in the east is a feature. He gave me a bright, flat smile, the kind he gives to board members across tables. These are not my first walls, he said. I know how many rooms I bought. Bulmer knows how many rooms she orders soap for. When the numbers disagree, we take a breath. And then, we do not call the press, he said. We call the person who can tell a room from an idea. He raised his glass. To rooms. To the people who build them, I said, weary, sincere. Lore Voss had died 5 years ago. No one had found her original study models. There were rumors she had left instructions in the studs, as if carpenters read the same magazines I do, and would consider it part of the job. After dinner, after a polite half hour in the library pretending to evaluate spines, after a brief conversation by the hearth with Mercer's adult daughter, Noelle, here for a week, face that liked to expect a door to open. After Bulmer pressed a flashlight into my hand with the instruction don't use it unless the house insists, and I asked what insistence looked like, and she said you will know. I did what no consultant is supposed to do, and every one of us does. I walked the house alone. There is a sound old plaster makes when it has something else behind it. You can hear its ambition. There is a draft you learn at graduate school to blame on 19th century windows, and that this building should not have had. There is a smell, iron and chalk, the beginning of rain, that accompanies discoveries in buildings that prefer their secrets wet. In the long gallery, I counted panes and columns and found one more of each than the photographs had taught me. In the service corridor, I found the old bellboard, converted into a silent piece of art, the little black plates still etched with names for rooms that had been renamed since construction. Morning room, anteroom, north, nursery, Mr. Mercer's dressing. The seam at the end of east was a painter's seam, thin and fine and proud of itself. The keyhole below eye level had the raggedness of something that had decided to be real without asking a carpenter for permission. I stood with the brass key in my palm and thought of the first studio I had ever rented, the one with the lock that only worked if you turned your wrist the way my father did when he straightened a picture frame. I thought of Lore Voss sitting on a bucket while Cruz rolled primer and asking herself how much mischief a house can endure before it becomes a haunted place instead of a good one. I put the key back on the sill like a person leaving a treat for a fox and went to bed with the light on, because I am brave for a living and therefore allowed one cowardice a night. Sometime after 3, I know because the travel clock on the bedside table sighed and turned its numbers like a person in the next bed rolling over. The house made the sound it makes when it decides, a soft, private click, not in the plumbing, not in the walls, in the idea of the wall. It was the same sound an architect makes when she lifts a tracing paper overlay and says, to no one there. In the morning there was a door. It did not belong. Its timber matched nothing. Its proportions were half a hand too narrow for the corridor. Its knob a simple, old brass ball that exhaled cold even in the heated hallway. It had no casing, no trim. It met the plaster as if the wall had grown skin around it overnight. Where the seam had been, there was only the hairline shadow of a reveal. Practice become fact. On the brass knob, under my reflection in miniature, someone had left a print in plaster dust shaped like a polite question mark. Bulmer arrived at 7 with coffee and a band of housekeepers behind her like a choir. She did not look surprised. She set the tray on the hall table and folded her arms and said, without a flourish, it chooses where to begin. It likes an audience. She looked at me the way a supervisor looks at a new hire and added, very softly, don't open it alone. Mercer did not come.
It was too early for men who like yachts.
It was just me and Bulmer and Rusk, the security man, a former detective who wore his suit like an apology and followed distance like a rule, standing in a corridor that had never contained a door and now did. Rusk prodded the paint around the knob with a fingernail and sniffed.
Wet, he said.
As if someone finished at 4 and went home. He tried the knob without looking at me. It moved a cautious inch and stopped. The old brass key waited on the sill like an argument. I picked it up because someone had addressed it to me. Ms. Reed, Bulmer said gently. I'm not alone, I said, and let the key turn. The latch withdrew with a noise that preferred to be remembered, and the door eased inward as if gravity had made a friend on the other side. The smell that came out was not rot and not dust. It was the smell of a place that had decided to be occupied. I wish I could say I hesitated. I did not. I have made worse mistakes with better houses. I stepped into a room that had not existed yesterday and felt the floor answer my weight like a question that already knew the answer. The room was not grand. It was not a trick. It was a small study, and it was mine. No, not mine, but I recognized its grammar the way you recognize a song you didn't know you knew. The exact wrong green on the walls I had chosen when I was 21 and certain of not being sentimental. The cheap pine shelves flexing under the cheap books of graduate school. The little iron desk from the flea market with a drawer that stuck until you swore at it in a particular way. On the desk, a teacup with a hairline crack and a yellow legal pad with 2 lines of a sentence I never published because by the time I found it, I no longer wanted to be the kind of person who said it. Penciled in my hand. Negative space is not emptiness. And under it, in a different pencil, in a tidy Roman hand I had already seen once, it is where the room leaves you to finish the thought. Ms. Reed, Bulmer said again, not unkindly, and I heard the carefulness in her voice and understood she was giving me permission to choose the order in which I was going to be afraid. Rusk had not taken a step over the threshold. What am I looking at? He asked, and mercifully did not say how or why, because those words break in rooms like this. You're looking at the room Ava kept her secrets in, 15 years and 3 apartments ago, I said, and felt a kind of frozen laughter happen in my chest. I pulled the sticky drawer with the correct profanity and found, at the back, under a sheaf of unpaid citation copies from the city I had loved badly, a white envelope stamped with my name. Inside, a single sheet, tracing paper, the same steady capitals as the scrap on my desk upstairs. Program, reveal. Constraints, truth only. Method, architectural. Client, house. Bulmer, who had learned the posture of women who let other people fall apart while they keep the teacups from leaping off the shelves, kept her eyes on mine. Yesterday, she said, there was a closet here if there was anything here at all. Today it is a room that knows your handwriting. We have had iterations, none so unambiguous. You can step out now. Have your fear somewhere with better ventilation. I'm fine. I lied, but took one step backward because I am an old dog who has learned one new trick at a time. The edge of the door brushed my sleeve like a clothesline and left a white kiss of plaster. Rusk reached to turn the knob and stop it from closing and froze. The knob under his hand had changed temperature. Ms. Reed, he said, no title this time, no ma'am. An officer's voice that knew when to be a neighbor. This is your room. The next one won't be. Whose will it be? I asked, but the house had no obligation to answer a question it had asked first. And behind the wall, I thought I heard the shy, thickened sound of fresh plaster curing, as if the building were swallowing something it had told us and would take its time learning to digest. Chapter 2, The First Secret. By noon, the entire staff had found a reason to pass the threshold of East and pretend not to look. The gardener with the polite mud on his boots and the polite rage you cannot do without in men who keep hedges straight. The chef with her white jacket unbuttoned one notch and a pencil behind her ear. The cleaning woman who had been here since the first paint dried and had learned incredible tenderness toward door handles. Noelle Mercer with her hands in the back pockets of jeans that had never known dishonest work. People moving through a corridor behave like water. You can see where the house meant them to go by where they slow. It's a trick, the chef said, not to me, to herself, and pinched the bridge of her nose like a person about to remember a recipe she'd been making for 20 years. Hiding in plain sight. It's unkind, Noelle said softly, eyes not on my small, stolen study, but on her father's face as he arrived late, with a smile like a peace offering and a habit like a weapon. It's unkind to do it this way. Mercer's gaze passed over the books, the teacup, the cheap desk. These things did not interest him, and landed on the envelope in my hand, the only part of the room that looked like something he might want to own. You're not the only one who's written a program, he said, and nodded toward the sheet with client. House in those delicious letters. The architect left a set of instructions for the contractors so they could not be stupid without blame. Program: light the north hall with winter sun. Constraint: long shadows, no glare. She wrote like a machine and spoke like a preacher. If this is her hand, I will be furious. If this is her hand, Bulmer said evenly, you will donate your anger to the endowment and sit quietly while the house does what it was built to do. What was it built to do? Noelle asked, more to the room than to any of us, and I could feel her lining up her mother's myths against her father's pragmatism and discovering both made poor furniture. Rusk had folded himself against the opposite wall, a large man making himself small the way kind men do in hallways when they want women to walk by without thinking about him. He had not crossed the threshold. He watched the corners, ceiling, desk, the shadow under the bottom shelf, and counted something in his head. Cameras show nothing after 2:43 a.m., he said. Not a cut, not a glitch. We have the corridor, then static, then corridor with a door. Whatever it is doesn't enjoy being recorded, and it knows my blind spots better than the plans do. No one opened an exterior door, Bulmer added.
No vehicles.
The only person who moved between 2 and 5 was Mrs. Phelps, and she moves every night between 2 and 5 because she likes to tell the house she has a spine. Mrs. Phelps, the night cleaner, bristled a little. The house already knew, she muttered, not with malice, with familiarity. You do the glass. You do the brass. You do the stairs last so your knees enjoy the rest. The east corridor didn't exist at 2. At 3 it did. At 4 I left it alone, because a new thing in a rich man's house is always a trap. Miss Phelps, Mercer said mildly, faintly amused by the democratic nature of terror in a building he owned. You are invited to call me Elias when secrets appear. She looked at him over her readers and said, without humor, no, sir. We stood a long time with the door open, as if we might dilute the room's intent by pouring the rest of the house into it. Then Bulmer closed it with a decisive click, as if to remind us that we could end chapters without burning the book. There will be another, she said. Night does not enjoy being the only one who knows what a house will become. Mercer made a show of exhaling. Which of us, he asked, cheerfully reckless, has the least to fear from a door? No one answered. Noelle picked at a thread on her pocket and let her silence be the answer. We convened where all modern mysteries are convened these days, around a table with coffee, too many screens, and a printer that refused to accept the crisis. Rusk spread the floor plan, my plan, since I had brought the most complete copy of Lore Voss's published article, alongside the building's facilities drawing, and we traced the difference with the kind of respectful aggression you save for people who will fight back. East corridor, 6 meters longer than published. Service spine, unaccountably wider at the elbow just before the kitchen. A wall in the library that, last year on the insurance report, had been a straight, clean line and now, on this morning's walk, bowed inward at the left end, as if considering becoming friendly. Rooms do not grow at night, Mercer said, but he said it with the air of a man trying on a sentence he wouldn't mind losing in court. Bedrooms don't, Bulmer conceded.
Scenes do.
We should leave, the chef said abruptly, and then, when no one laughed, I'm serious. I worked in a hotel in Nice where they called a priest because the ice machine cursed the maids by name, and it turned out to be a boy with a speaker and a crush. This is not a boy and a speaker. This is a client no one can fire. If the house is working to a program, I said, surprising myself with the calm in my own voice, then it has constraints. It is choosing from a limited set of operations. Insert here, produce there, disguise edge, replicate artifact. Someone wrote a grammar for it. Someone taught it how to choose. Whether that someone is a human with a guilty conscience, a very good mechanical system, or a truly unpleasant metaphor for wealth, we can learn the grammar one room at a time. You're proposing we let it continue, Rusk said, without accusation. I'm proposing we watch it without flinching, I said. If we flinch, it will do what all bad actors do when the audience gives them permission. It will become louder. Noelle, who had been quiet long enough to make me like her, looked up. And if the next one is mine, she asked, lightly, like a joke told to test a bone, do we all look at it together? Or Do you let me open it by myself and pretend you didn't hear what you heard?" Bulmer did not smile. "We assign a witness," she said. "We do not abandon anyone to a room, even if the room is theirs." We didn't make it to dinner before the second door. It arrived in the long gallery, the showpiece, as if the house wanted to demonstrate range. There were guests then. 2 foundation men in jackets too tight across the chest, a woman from a magazine who walked as if the floor should tilt toward her, a hairdresser brought in to make a portrait out of a man wearing several regrets, and when the small new door appeared between Turner and de Kooning, everyone went still the way animals go still when the air changes pressure. This door was taller than the first, narrower, and set so flush into the paneling that the grain tried to refuse it. It had no knob. It had, impossibly, a steel hotel latch at shoulder height, the kind you flip when you take your shoes off and want the world to understand you're not opening up for anyone. Someone had drawn, with a carpenter's pencil and a slowing hand, a line around the door on the paneling, as if a child had been asked to trace the shape of a fear. It's another of her interventions. The magazine woman breathed, thrilled, already writing her little paragraph in her little head, already practicing her syntax. Voss anticipated. Voss interrogates. Voss is having a laugh. Bulmer did not look at her. She looked at Rusk. He looked at me. I reached for the latch and stopped because my brain, which is usually good at insisting on order, had made a noise like a hand slapping a table. The latch had been flipped from the inside. "Who is in there?" Noel asked quietly, and whatever I had been about to say fell out of my mouth and onto the marble like a very small plate. Mercer made the mistake people with money make when they feel cornered. He moved quickly. He slid a letter opener under the latch and lifted and jimmied and did a small, precise violence to the idea of privacy that made me like him less, and Rusk began to say sir in a tone that meant stop. The latch gave the way latches do when they remember which side the law is on. The door opened to a smell, cold coffee, cheap soap, carpet shampoo, and the sight of a bedspread with a pattern too floral to be expensive and a painting so offensively bland no one had chosen it. It had been assigned. It was a motel room. It was the motel room, the one they all have. The small square table with the plated steel legs. The air conditioner under the window that has never once in its life made air conditioned. The mirror that is, for once, genuinely two-way because it belongs to a city. The door on the far wall with the bar lock and the gouge where someone once tried to force it with a screwdriver. And next to the television, a very old television, the little bolted safe that never works, and above the safe a framed credit card acceptance sign from a bank that changed its logo in 2009. Rusk put one palm on the jamb before stepping in, like a man meeting a dog who might be unkind. He lifted the telephone receiver, beige, greasy, and put it to his ear. He listened.
He did not speak.
He put it down. He opened the safe, which could not have been a safe because nothing here could have been anything, and inside, he found an envelope too thin to have money in it and too thick to have nothing. He did not open it. He turned, held it at arm's length toward Noel, toward the guests, toward the man from the foundation, toward the house that had made it. "This is not mine," he said before anyone could say it for him. "Then whose is it?" the magazine woman asked, half fascinated, half disappointed that she was not getting a better story. "Mine," said a voice at the door, and Bulmer swore under her breath because she does not like to be surprised by women who make a habit of being on time. It was the hairdresser. They had called her Gigi, small, no nonsense, the kind of woman who carries her own stool and knows that men prefer the mirror to show them 5 years less. Her face changed as she saw the bedspread, the television, the air conditioner. Her hand went to her throat as if checking for a necklace she no longer wore. "It was this exact one," she said, half laughing, because some traumas headline themselves even to their owners. The trim on the lamp, the chip in the safe's paint, the way the bathroom door never closes unless you lift it with your knee. "You don't have to," Bulmer began. "I do," Gigi said, and took the envelope from Rusk. It had a motel's letterhead in one corner that had nothing to do with this town. Inside were 2 Polaroids, warped at the edges from a long time in someone else's heat, and a scrap of receipt paper with 3 words written in a hand that wants to be forgiven. I was there. Gigi looked at the first photograph. A man on the edge of the bed with his hand in his hair, not undressed, not caught. Just a man who had not expected to see himself and made a small sound. She looked at the second, a child's birthday cake with the candles not lit on a table that had known neither lace nor care, and she laughed without humor. He was at the motel, not at the party, she said, which could have been a cliché if the room had not also remembered the smell of the shampoo she had used that year, and the exact way the white bedspread held its waviness, and the tiny curve in the right-hand lampshade where somebody's elbow had lived. "Ms. Giardina," Rusk said, softly, "the way you say a person's real name when you have called them something else all afternoon. We don't need to make an exhibit of this." "We already did," she said, and slid the photographs back into the envelope with the care of a person who promises herself to burn them later and knows she will not. She looked around the room like a woman closing an old door, and then looked up, past the lintel, toward the seam where the new wall met the old, and said, to the house, to herself, to the child she did not take to the party, "I'm sorry I ever thought I could make you quiet." No one touched anything else. Not even the magazine woman, who had begun to look ill at the thought of writing the piece she had come for. Rusk held the door as Bulmer reversed us out of it like a midwife navigating a room that had turned small. He let it swing shut. It latched with the soft, private click of a person deciding to keep something to themselves. When we looked again 5 minutes later, the latch was gone. When we looked 10 minutes after that, there was no door, only a panel that would have passed inspection in any museum. The foundation men left without finishing their wine. The magazine woman asked for the bathroom and stayed there until someone else knocked, and then she left without pretending she had been fine. Gigi sat in the kitchen with her little stool under her and her hands folded like a schoolgirl's until Mercer, to his credit, brought her a glass of water, and Bulmer, to hers, brought her an orange and a knife that cut like a confidence. At 8, with the light nearly gone, Noelle found me on the east landing staring at the seam where my study had been. The door was still there, my desk behind it, my teacup on it, the legal pad with my younger hand sentence. The corridor had found its stride again. Guests had gone. The staff had done what staff does, in this world, and the world that came before. Continued the day without asking whether it should. "He thinks he can pay it," Noelle said, leaning her shoulder against the wall, and adopting the posture of women who need a conversation and the excuse they eye when they get one. "He believes that if he writes a check large enough, a house stops being itself. It's how he speaks to people. It works often enough that he thinks it is a language." "And you?" "I think the house built itself around him the way a scar forms around a splinter," she said, not unkindly. "But I also think he didn't put the splinter there. Lore did. Or the client before him. Or the land. This hill isn't." She searched for the word and then didn't bother with the right one. "Neutral. Tell me about your mother," I said, to test whether the house would punish me. "Brilliant," she said. "Bored. Furious at ceilings that were not as high as her friend's ceilings. She hated this house because it didn't need her to be dazzling. She loved a different one across town with terrible windows because it forgave her. She went to Italy and forgot to come home on time, and then remembered too late and died in a hospital full of nurses she never thanked. If the house makes a room for her, it will not be the one you expect." She straightened. "You should sleep with the door closed." "The corridor door?" "All of them," she said, and smiled like a person who has learned intimacy with caution. "If there is another room tonight, you don't want its draft on your feet." After she left, after the staff's radios had gone to a hush and the kitchen lights had lowered themselves and the hedges had remembered they were dangerous, I stood in the corridor and did something I have never done on a job. I spoke to the house out loud. "If you are a machine," I said, "I will learn you. If you are a person, I will not let you make me cruel. If you are a metaphor, I am too tired. Pick one." At 3 again, that small, private click. Not in the east. In the service spine, the elbow where the corridor widens for no good reason, the place the plans never wholly accounted for. Bulmer's note had said don't use the flashlight unless the house insists. It insisted. I took the light, tipped it low, walked barefoot like a burglar, and stopped in front of a reveal I had not seen at dinner. The paint was wet. The seam was fine. The keyhole was above my knee, as if whoever would open it had a habit of kneeling. On the plaster to the right of the knob, something, had scratched lightly with a key or a ring, words that I wished were not legible. Rooms appear when you lie. Behind me, very softly, somewhere in the house I had come to catalog and in the life I had come to avoid, a door closed the way a mouth does when it has just decided to keep your secret for one more night. Chapter 3. The Elbow. By afternoon, the house had settled into the posture of a thing trying not to show off. Good light, tidy floors, a draft only when you wanted one. Bulmer ran the household as if routine were a sedative. Mercer took 2 calls on the terrace with his back to the view. Noelle disappeared into the library and pretended to rearrange the travel shelves while actually not reading. Rusk walked the routes with a detective's patience and the tender caution of a man who has learned the difference between suspicious and sacred. I kept to the service spine because that is where a house tells the truth first. The good foyers and famous stairs will lie for decades. The corridor behind the kitchen forgets how. At the elbow where the wall widens for no good reason, the paint had dried to a tautness that made a line of light along the reveal. The keyhole sat low, indecorous, like a child's idea of privacy. And to the right of it, scratched in with the haste of someone who didn't want to be caught confessing in public. Rooms appear when you lie. I thought of all the times I've told rooms the small lies that keep them calm. Lovely light. The crack won't travel. You can't smell panic. And felt the floor answer with a caution I had not earned. I thought, too, of the house's first gift. My study as it had been, fish belly paint, cheap iron desk, the sentence that never made it to print. That door had offered nostalgia dressed as revelation. This one asked for knees. Bulmer came without being summoned, which is the kind of magic that lets certain women run entire empires with a cardigan and a pad of graph paper. She stood opposite me, hands folded, looking not at the door but at my face. "It's yours?" I asked. "It will be blamed on me," she said, which was not the same thing, and then, after a moment, "Catholic girls can smell this woodwork from a province away." She touched the edge with one forefinger. We had a booth like this at St. Albans. The grill was splinters, and the velvet on the kneeler made the same sigh. You could tell the regulars by the shape of the varnish where they worried it with their thumbs. Rusk had been summoned by the radio on Bulmer's belt and arrived at a trot that he turned into a walk 2 steps from us, out of courtesy. He tipped his head at the keyhole. "Not your height," he said to me. "Not mine. Not Mercer's. Chapel. Or child." Bulmer exhaled. "I won't have a ceremony," she said. "Not to us. To the corridor. We will open it like civilized people, and we will not say, 'Forgive me,' out loud." She reached into her sweater, brought out a ring of keys. They were house keys, not church. The brass didn't know what it was doing. She tried 3 before admitting the door, didn't speak that language. I lifted the gray grosgrain key, the one the house had left for me, and it slid home with a hospitality that made Rusk look at the ceiling and mutter something about precedent. We opened it together because the rules Bulmer was writing as we went required that, and because none of us wanted to be the one to tell the house that we preferred drama. The door swung inward on new hinges that creaked as if they knew to be old. The smell was a concentrated memory. Lemon oil, beeswax, the breath of paper that had been folded and unfolded too often. It was a confessional, a delicately mean one, the sort built for parishioners a generation ago, when privacy was a grace and not a right. Narrow booth, velvet kneeler, a grill that allowed a priest to be a silhouette and a penitent to be a rumor. But the priest's side had been replaced with a shallow desk, a thin drawer, a stack of index cards bound in a rubber band gone brittle with time and heat. On the wall above the desk hung a housekeeping schedule, typed on a manual machine and updated in pencil, the kind of sheet a house wears under its dress. On the top line, circled once, were 3 names, N. Ferreira, P. Madsen, L. Pike. Next to them, a date from 10 years ago, and under notes, a faint annotation in a tidy, Roman hand. Transfer. Below it, in a different pencil, in a careening, frantic hand I recognized from small notes in the staff pantry, fell /blood/don't call. The last 2 words erased and written again, and erased again until they were a pale indentation, and not ink at all. Bulmer didn't kneel. She stepped in past us, as if she were entering a pantry she had arranged herself, and slid the drawer open. A hairpin sat inside, simple tortoiseshell with one broken tooth. A safety badge, red, with the name Ferreira and a photo of a girl not yet used to being photographed for a job. A hospital bracelet with the letters PI, and the rest scrubbed away by time and friction. And an envelope stamped with the estate's old letterhead from before Mercer rebranded it with a monogram, addressed to the manager in old blue ink. Bulmer looked at the name on the bracelet once, put it face down without speaking, and broke the envelope carefully. She read the one sheet inside to herself first, an old habit of hers, to let knowledge acclimate to the room, and then passed it open to me. Bulmer, we will call it transfer because we did not put up a rail on the landing when we moved the pianino, and I cannot bear the idea of a headline with Mercer's name in it. Miriam says she tripped. The boys say they heard a crack and thought it was a banister. I think it was our pride and the width of that corner. I have already paid her sister 2 months' wages out of the petty cash, and will continue out of my own if Mercer notices. If you insist on calling the papers, I will stand beside you. If you insist on confession, you may do so for both of us after you have taken down the wreath from the east door. Do not let the ribbon stare own us. Order the rail.
Lore.
The page smelled of paste and someone else's office, the kind of paper architects used when they wanted copies not to shine. It was not the letter of a woman who believed in hauntings. It was the memo of a woman who knew that the shape of a landing could ruin a life and that the word transfer is a trick meant for ledgers, not souls. Bulmer read the letter a second time, nodded once, and put it back as if returning a borrowed book. I called no one, she said, to the little booth to us. We paid. We ordered the rail. We put flowers in a place no one would see, and I made the boys take a different route with the pianino. I told myself the house would not let it happen again. She touched the hairpin with the tenderness you save for objects more stubborn than they look. The girl's name wasn't Ferreira, she said softly. It was Pike. We called her by her sister's badge for 2 months because the laminator broke and Ferreira was easier to mispronounce than Pike. She wore it because she was kind. She did not complain. That's the part one find hard to forgive. This didn't make the papers, Rusk said, unnecessarily. No, Bulmer said, a little vicious now. Nothing makes the papers in a house with an endowment if the men at the top know how to wind a clock. We did what grand houses do. We kept ourselves. And now it's made a booth, and it's asked me to kneel for a thing that is already in the ledger of my bones. You did order the rail, I said. I ordered too, she said. It was an apology to the floor. She straightened. If the house wishes to out me, it can try a more original sin. This one I carry in my skirt pocket. She stepped out. The booth exhaled. Something, the rubber band, the bracelet, clicked softly against the wood as if the room were acknowledging that it had been heard. Rusk closed the door 50%, lingered, then shut it all the way with care. We stood in the elbow with the smell of lemon oil and paper still on us. Who was Lore writing to? He asked. To me, Bulmer said. I hadn't been hired yet. She gave me the job by assuming I would take responsibility. You didn't call the priest, I said. Even then. Bulmer's smile showed 3 decades of stubborn and a little kindness for her own younger self. I called the carpenter, she said. It seemed holier. We were still there, measuring our loyalty to each other against our loyalty to the house, when the radio on Rusk's belt barked and made everybody jump. The gardener, breathless, channeling panic into British vowels. Mr. Rusk, North Gallery, sir. Another, sir. Which end? Rusk said, already moving. The glass, came the answer, and then, as if he was embarrassed to finish the sentence, it looks like Town Hall. Chapter 4, Glass. There are corridors that are only corridors and corridors that keep score. The North Gallery had always been one of the latter. A long run of polished concrete, glass on glass on glass, the infamous ribbon stair curling like a boast in the near distance. Today it pretended to be neutral. It had a new door. It wasn't a panel this time. It wasn't even polite. The door stood in the center of the glass wall as if a child had drawn it there in a dream and then the building had been forced to make it real. A rectangle of milky translucent glass with a brushed steel pull and a municipal sticker in the corner that read Inspected 2008. Beyond it, dimly, the outline of chairs in a line, a lectern, a coat rack with too many empty hangers. We could see our own reflections ghosting on the surface, layered over the shapes on the other side, like fault lines drawn over a map. Noelle arrived with the expression of a woman who has been called into a meeting she did not schedule. Mercer took his place at the edge of the frame with the ease of a man who thinks doors are opportunities. Bulmer stood behind us, arms folded so tight the cardigan creaked. Gigi, lingering on the periphery now that the house had announced it knew her name, hung back by the bench as if prepared to run an errand none of us would admit we needed. Rusk touched the glass with his fingertips and nodded to himself.
Tempered, he said.
Not from here. From where? Mercer demanded. From wherever you made deals you wished would look official, Bulmer answered, quiet as a well-timed insult. The municipal sticker made my scalp prickle. I have sat in too many rooms with sealant fumes and too little air, watching men slide documents across tables. I wiped a circle on the glass with my sleeve. Bulmer flinched, then forgave me, and peered through. The town hall room inside had been flattened to an essence. Metal folding chairs, a lectern with a pleasing ding from too many wedding toasts, the framed portrait of a mayor 2 terms ago, whose lapel pin always caught the flash, the clock at the back that never told the same time twice to 2 different people. On the front row, left of center, someone had placed a legal pad and a capped black pen. On the lectern, a paper tent card with a name in block letters that made Noelle inhale as if something had struck her. Elias Mercer. It's not what you think, he said automatically, which is the sentence of a man who's learned he is almost always the subject of the room. What do I think? Noelle asked evenly. That I bought a zoning variance like a sandwich, he said, with tired bravado. I made a donation. I called it civic-mindedness. The council moved a fence on a map and kept the school lot clean, and then everyone got to pretend I liked parks. Rusk reached for the pull. The door did not resist. The air beyond it had the metallic flavor of HVAC and hand sanitizer, the kind of odor that convinces you nothing living can hurt you here. We filed in. The glass whispered shut behind us with that smug little hiss only new doors make. Bulmer's shoes made no noise on the floor.
Mercer's did.
On the lectern, next to the place card, lay a manila folder stamped staff. Docket in a municipal font that makes me think of stamped parking tickets and the thin politeness of people who attend meetings because the alternative would be to move. Mercer put his hand on it, as if he were studying a child, and then took it away as if the folder had accused him of something. Noelle did not take a seat. She stood 3 paces back from the lectern, as if distance were a form of PPE. What did you say at this microphone that you told me for 5 years you never said? She asked. Mercer did something rare for him. He answered without staging himself. That we would keep the old facade, he said. That the scale of the block would not be insulted. That the tower would step back so a person on the street would feel blessed. He almost smiled at himself. We do love the word blessed when we build things people can't afford. And did you? I kept the facade. We moved it 6 inches and pretended it hadn't noticed. We stepped back. We stepped forward again at 3 a.m. He broke off because the folder had learned to clear its throat. It wasn't a noise. It was an insistence. He flipped it open. Inside lay a glossy rendering, my profession's favorite lie, of a building that had never been built and yet looked exactly like the one on the hill now if you'd asked a computer to make it less candid. On the right-hand side, in blue fountain pen ink, an annotation in that tidy Roman hand I was beginning to dread. Elias, program accommodates both truths. You may say keep, allowed, and remove in the contract. Architecture will translate. L, below it, in pencil, a later note, different pressure, not bosses but written in the precise hand of a lawyer. Owner acknowledges. Public statement symbolic. Noelle's mouth went flat in a way that made me like her even as it made me want to sit down for her.
So you lied, she said.
I did what they wanted me to do, he said. I gave them the promise and the building. And now the building is giving the promise back. I said. Rusk had wandered to the back row the way men wander into the edges of rooms to see if the shadows speak more clearly there. He picked up the capped pen from the front chair and tapped it once against his palm. "There's something else," he said. Under the chair where the legal pad had been, under that front row seat a certain type of man takes because he believes both in the importance of where he sits and in eye contact, was a small, plastic voting device, the kind you get in town meetings where the chair has learned to distrust the hum. It had 3 buttons, yes and no, ABSDN. The yes was worn. The NO had a chip in it that made it not register unless you pressed with your thumbnail. Taped to the battery door on the back were 2 numbers, the parcel ID for the block where Mercer had built his glass, and another string that meant nothing to me, and everything to Rusk. "Permit log," he said. Office number for the clerk, who went home early that day. Noelle picked up the device the way a person picks up an insect they are teaching a child not to be afraid of. "Rooms appear when you lie," she said. "Do they go away when you tell the truth?" "Not in my experience," Bulmer said. "To my experience," Mercer said, almost urgent now, as if the room could be persuaded by tone. "There were 2 truths. We needed a building. The city needed a park. We made a trade. And you told me for 5 years you never traded," Noelle said. She turned to the glass and raised her voice not for effect, but because she needed to hear herself outside her own skull. "He traded," she said. "He traded. He traded." It felt, stupidly, like a ritual, and therefore like something the house might respect. The clock on the back wall, cheap, misguided, municipal, ticked from 3:14 to 3:15 and then to 3:16 without incident. I exhaled in a way I did not enjoy hearing in my own chest. "Who else was in this room?" I asked. "Everyone," Mercer said. "The man with the pen behind his ear, who wanted to be paid on time. The woman in the second row, who was the last person on earth to believe a rendering. The councilman who smiled with his gums when he knew he had the votes. The clerk, dear God the clerk, who liked me, Ava. He liked me, and that has been half my trouble for 20 years. Bulmer reached past him and plucked the tent card off the lectern as if it had offended her personally. She turned it over. On the back, in the same careful Roman capitals, were the words "Say it out loud." Mercer looked at her, and then at the chairs, and then at his daughter. "I traded," he said, first like a recitation, then again like a man trying on a suit that keeps changing sizes. "I traded." I said keep, and then I instructed remove, and I asked the architect to translate me into a drawing that did both. I called it symbol. It was contempt. The clock on the back wall hiccuped once and, stubborn thing that it is, corrected itself to whatever time the building held in its bones. The door released a breath of air and made that little hiss new doors are so proud of. Rusk opened it with a commendable lack of performance. As we passed out into the gallery, Noelle touched my sleeve. "I'll tell you another truth," she said, looking not at me but at the ribbon stare, which has humiliated better women than me. "He didn't invent the trade. He learned it from rooms like this." "From lore?" I asked softly. "From everyone who ever told a building that it could be 2 things at once for a fee," she said. "He's a man. He'd have found that trick anyway. But the house loves him for it. Or it did. Now it." She stopped, as if the rest were either cruel or obvious. "It's writing him into it," I said. "It's writing us all into it," she said. The glass door was gone within the hour. The sticker with inspected 2008 had vanished, as if the house had never risked a municipal adjective. In its place, the ribbon stare curled with its usual arrogance, and the long run of glazing pretended to have been unbroken since delivery. We stood in the corridor and pretended with it. "Tonight," Rusk said, "we rotate. No one walks alone after midnight. If you wake and the house has built you a room, you text." He glanced at Bulmer and amended nothing. She would text if she felt like it and not if she didn't. "And if the house builds one for me?" Noelle asked. She wasn't mocking. She was measuring. "Then we all stand in the hall," Bulmer said. "We hold the door open while you decide what to do with the thing you thought you had hidden. That is our ritual. That and coffee." "And rails," I said. "And rails," she agreed with force. I went back to East 3, and sat at the little writing table with a fountain pen that wanted to be used and the embossed paper that had not deserved its fate. I wrote 3 sentences I have never written in a job report. The house is running a program. The rule is disclosure. The method is architectural. I added a line under it smaller. For me, it is not exorcism. It is archive. At 3, the sound again, private, decisive, bloomed in the part of the building that is neither public nor service, the little dogleg off the library where people answer texts in museums pretending they're looking for the bathroom. I took my light. I did not hurry. People who run in houses get hurt. The door had grown flush in the paneling between travel, North Africa, and sailing.
No latch. No que yole.
Just a push plate whose brass bore the elliptical shine of fingers that had pressed it under pressure. The caption card below the shelf. Bulmer labels even the bookshelves, because she is a better curator than the foundation ever will be, had shifted left to make room for a white rectangle someone had taped there, with letters I recognized now the way you recognize a friend's handwriting in a stack of bills. Noelle, say it yourself. Behind me, in the deep of the room, I heard someone take the first careful step of a person walking toward a door they did not order. Chapter 5, The Dogleg. The house expects women to arrive first. I don't know how it learns that, but it does. Noelle came up from the blue chair by the fireplace like a swimmer breaking the surface, shook out her shoulders as if the air were a wet towel, and met me at the dogleg off the library without letting me pretend I had to say her name twice. The white rectangle we'd found taped under the shelf labels was still there, the tidy Roman capitals impossible to ignore. Noelle, say it yourself. The push plate below it had the shine of repetition worn into it. Somebody, lately or long ago, had pressed here with the heel of a hand that didn't want to fail in public. Do I confess? She asked, and she made a face at the word as if it were an olive she was willing to eat to prove a point. Bulmer says no ceremonies, I said. Not that kind. But you might need to talk to the thing that thinks it's your witness. She looked at the books, sailing, travel, North Africa, and startled a little when she saw the gap where she knew a monograph had been last year and wasn't now. I moved that myself, she murmured. I don't know why I'm honest about that and not about. She stopped, inhaled, and did it the way you do it when you've decided to stop letting an untruth keep the better seed in your head. I burned them, she said, to the panel, to the plate, to me. Lore's drawings. Not all. A box. The vellums. I did it in the grill on the East Terrace after a dinner, where Father announced to 3 donors that the Voss archive in situ would make the house pay for itself twice over. He hadn't found them. I had. I took the box out and I put a blanket over it to make it look like linens, and I told myself I was protecting the work from being sold as object instead of instruction. Then I told myself I was protecting him from thinking he owned her more thoroughly than he already did. Then I told myself I was a good daughter. I lie well when I give myself an assignment. Where were they? I asked quietly. She put her palm on the brass. Right here, she said, and pressed. The panel unlidded itself without a seam, without a sound. The air that came out had the faint, wicked sweetness of paper that has only recently remembered it was trees. The space inside was shallow, lit by the yellow that old bulbs give when they refuse to retire. It was neither office nor altar, just a rectangle between walls, the right size for a fallible human to hide things behind a bookcase and tell herself she had not. On a narrow shelf, a flat, fireproof document pouch, the cheap kind you buy at a stationer's thinking it will make you a better person. A stainless steel flat-file drawer front, severed from its body and screwed to the wall as a joke, its label slot empty. A ceramic ashtray the house must have borrowed from the guest wing, heavy, hotel brown, the glaze crazed like a spiderweb. Inside the ashtray, a crescent of gray that looked like the moon of 100 tiny decisions. Set carefully beside it a Zippo lighter, engraved not with initials, but with a millimeter-accurate drawing of the ribbon stair. Noelle looked at the ash and laughed without heat. I told myself the grill would make it look like dinner, she said. I told myself smoke has no adjectives. I forgot paper has a specific way of telling the air it's leaving. Is that pouch? I reached without touching. She took it down and did the zipper slowly, as if the document inside might bolt if alarmed. The charcoal smell sharpened, and then, grace or chance, the top vellum was intact. It was not the rendering a magazine would print. It was the thing that makes those lies possible. A sheet of Lore's handwriting and arrows and constraints. The kind of page she taught whole rooms of men to pretend to have made themselves. Program: if client withholds truth, introduce room. Constraints: architectural, localized, recognizability to subject, no harm beyond recognition. Method: reveal by reproduction, material memory. Secure egress, no duplication, record acknowledgement. Test cases: loss, domestic, transfer, injury, commerce, public, private, desire. At the bottom, in smaller letters, the note you write to your future self when you know you won't be brave at midnight. The building is honest if we are not. Do not let it become punishment. Under that, a list of names I recognize now as the house's grammar. In a narrow column, penciled and erased and penciled again, dates. The side test: private, desire. A faint, embarrassed tick mark. The side transfer: injury. A darker one with a smudge that might have been a finger that hadn't fully dried. The side commerce: today's town hall. A fresh scratch of pencil point as if someone had put furniture into a ledger and needed to keep count. Why burn them? I asked, though she had told me. Her hand made an angry little circle in the air, the gesture we make when the thing we mean is too large for the sentence we have. Because he would make them into a plaque, she said. Because I didn't understand yet that he couldn't make this build itself louder. He could only take credit when it did. Because I was angry at what the house had done to my mother's marriage and wanted to throw something heavy into a hunger I couldn't name. Because I didn't want to become him. Because I already had. She set the vellum down and exhaled through her teeth. That's a lot of reasons for a little ash. Rusk stood inside the space as far as his shoulders allowed and reached to the back of the shallow cavity. His fingertips tapped something tinny. He brought it out. A key in a small, crimped envelope. Bank logo 3 names ago. Box 347. Lockridge Trust. The Old Town Bank. The one Lore had insisted the contractors use when she paid them in dribs and drafts. On the back of the envelope, a note in that now familiar Roman hand. For when the house is done talking. It finds the shape of your sin and draws the contour, Bulmer murmured. She wasn't shaming. She was measuring. It didn't build you a bonfire. It gave you a drawer and a key. Noelle closed the pouch, slid it back into the shelf. She didn't take the Zippo. She did take the key. She slid it into her jeans pocket the way you put a hand on a friend's shoulder without making a promise you can't keep. I won't apologize, she said, and then corrected herself, honest suddenly in a way that made me want to stand between her and anything mean. No, I will. To the work. To the house. Not to him. She nodded toward the dogleg. I'll apologize in front of him. That counts for double in this house. We closed the panel. The tape with her name had curled a corner, the way tape does when it has done its job and is preparing to leave without drama. The brass plate cooled under my palm. Go together, Bulmer said, as we stepped into the corridor. Bank later. The house is always hungrier after lunch. You think it eats our afternoons? Noelle asked. I think it keeps a ledger, Bulmer said, dry. And I think your father owes more receipts than any of us. At 4, the wind came up the hill the way it does on days with their minds changed. You could hear the hedge thinking about violence. The ribbon stair creaked in the language of its bolts. Somewhere near the atrium, a mobile shivered, and then remembered it was art. We drank the kind of coffee that tastes of tins and offices and did not go to the bank. At 6, the house announced itself by behaving perfectly. That is how it tells you it has something planned. Chapter 6, The Officer's Room. The door appeared at the place in the service spine where the security office pretends to be an electrical closet. Beige paint that forgives greasy hands. A dent at knee height that every nightman swears he didn't make. A wire muddle above the jamb that only one person can read. Rusk saw the reveal before any of us did. His head turned at the angle men pick up in squad cars after too many winter shifts and only 3 claims about the same break-in. He put his hand out like he was stopping traffic and smiled at me in apology. Permission to swear? Granted, Bulmer said. He didn't. He breathed in hard through his nose and blew it out again, and then he tried the handle. It gave with that immodest little click new hardware's so proud of. The room beyond was not large. It had a desk he knew better than he knew his own breakfast table. It had a chair that remembered his weight. It had his old police radio sitting on the blotter, and it had two objects that were not his: a cardboard evidence box with the county seal, and a photograph in a cheap frame turned face down. He did the thing good men do when they know a room is for them, and they wish it weren't. He waited. He looked at Bulmer as if she might let him put it off. He looked at me and did not ask for privacy. He looked finally at the photograph and turned it over. A little girl looked back from a school portrait, gap-toothed, a braid chewed at the end, the bravado of 8. Not from here. I know our school photographers ask too well. The backdrop was the row of trees they use in cities to say, outdoors, when the studio is on the 3rd floor. In thick marker at the bottom, ARI. Not a last name. Just the kind a kid writes when she hasn't learned anyone will ever need more. Rusk opened the evidence box like a prayer book, tender and old weight. Inside, a manila case file stamped missing 2012, a plastic bag with a folded map of the county with a circle around nowhere you'd want to step out of a car, a grease-stained receipt from a 7-Eleven on a state highway 2 towns over, and a badge in a leather wallet that was not his. Everything smelled of dust that had decided to be useful. He sat. The chair knew him. He put 2 fingers on the edge of the folder and pressed, as if anchoring the paperwork to the furniture could keep memory from being rude. His voice, when it came, was the voice cops use when they visit kitchens. I told the story a certain way when I took this job, he said, to us or to the wall or to a girl with a marker. I told it so many times it became the only way. Budget cuts. Politics. Tired of explaining to men with 2 clean hands what blood does when it finally tells the truth. That's all true. It isn't the truth. He opened the folder. An intake sheet with Ariadne P. Lehman typed at the top, age 8. Last seen at a gas station on Route 9 with a man the clerk said might have been her father and wasn't. A photocopy of a custody order that had needed 3 signatures and got 2. A printout of a 911 call with a script of panic that every operator in America can recite in their sleep. A small Polaroid of a white sedan with 1 hubcap missing. She wasn't mine, he said. Not my case. Not my precinct. But the clerk called me because I'm who you call when you're the kind of person who sees nothing wrong 12 times in a week, and then suddenly your skin tells you a story your eyes haven't learned yet. I drove out. I looked at the tape. I talked to a girl who hid under the counter when she heard the bell, because she thought bells were how men find you. I told my lieutenant I could take the lead if that is what made it move faster. He said no to punish me for an argument we'd had about a parking ticket he'd voided for someone who gave him tickets of a different kind. 2 days later, 2 days, Mercer called to offer me this job with a salary I had not earned and a chair that would not squeak and a house where I could swear under my breath at carpets instead of mothers in kitchens. So I took it. I told myself it was public service because this hill can eat people, and I like to stop that when I can. I told myself Ari would be better with a woman detective. I told myself lies I could live within a room that would not fix the way the world keeps its children. The old radio on the desk crackled. It made the sound radios make when storms are announced on other roads to men who do not yet believe in the rain. Rusk put his hand on it the way he had rested his palm on the confessional jamb, the way you steady yourself at a rail you installed late. He did not turn it on. Rooms appear when you lie, I said softly. You said budget. You meant a girl. I said tired, he said. I meant coward. He looked at the map in the bag. He looked at the ring spot, a farmer's track I recognized not because I had been there but because county maps have a way of learning men's habits. He didn't pull the map out. He set the whole bag in his lap like an unhappy cat and breathed like a man about to stand into something heavy. Noelle was at the door with her arms wrapped across her ribs the way women protect their hearts when they will not be rushed into forgiveness. Does this house want us to fix everything it shows us? She asked. She wasn't mocking. She wanted a rule. No, Bulmer said. It wants us to look while we carry it. That is the punishment and the pardon. Rusk stood. The chair forgave him the way furniture forgives men, who take jobs to pay for the men they didn't get to be. He tucked the photograph back into the frame and didn't turn it over. He bent his head to the radio and, in a voice not meant for us, said, "Ariadne P. Lehman, I did you a discourtesy with my pride. I have a car. I have a map. I have time I owe. I am going to go to that circle and knock on the door of a man I should have questioned 10 years ago. If you are anywhere where you can hear a person whose shoes squeak say your full name, listen for it. I will not stop at this house's hedges." The radio, which is a stupid object and knows it, hissed the way old machines do when they want to be human for half a second and have only air to offer. The room smelled faintly of toothpaste and cheap coffee and whatever word it is we use for the thing that happens when a man decides to be better in front of witnesses. We closed the door. It did not disappear. It stayed, the way certain rooms stay, ongoing, an instruction you do not get to file. "I should drive him," Mercer muttered, guilty suddenly about cars. It might have been theater, it might not. He looked at the box key burning a circle in his daughter's pocket like a coin in a child's fist. "After," he said. He surprised even himself by not offering to take the bank job now. He let the girl in the frame choose the order of his errands. We watched Rusk go down the service steps with the folder under his arm the way fathers carry squirming babies, competent, wary, tender. We heard the back door click and the gravel speak tires. We stood for a while in a corridor that had learned to build rooms from our worst best selves, and none of us wanted to be the first to compliment it. Bulmer exhaled like a woman who will be 87 and still tell people where to put their coats. "This isn't haunting," she said. "It's filing." Lore made a machine that refuses to let us behave as if a room is a place where nothing happened when we kept the door closed. She was a better priest than the priests. She wrote constraints. "No harm beyond recognition," I said. Bulmer nodded at the closed door. "Recognition can pull a person apart," she said. "The house had better also provide chairs to sit while you put yourself back together." Noelle touched my sleeve. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Bank. If the house is a ledger, I want to read the part she kept off-site." "We'll bring Bulmer," I said. "We'll bring coffee," Bulmer said. "We'll bring a bag for the thing we didn't know we needed to carry." That night I lay in East 3 with the lamp on, the way cowards do at hotels and women do in houses that listen. I did not sleep like a brave person or like a child. I slept like a secretary between wars, pen lined up parallel to paper, shoes under the bed facing the door. At 3:15, because that hour will never again be innocent to me, a door somewhere in the house clicked once, and somewhere else another clicked in answer. A pair. A conversation. The building had learned duets. I did not get up. I put my hand on the wall and waited for the plaster to tell me whether it wanted me to be the one to listen. It cooled under my palm. It allowed me ignorance. It let me keep my strength for morning and banks and off-site archives and girls with one name written in marker who deserved more rooms than we had given them. Chapter 7. Box 347. Lockridge Trust looked the way banks like to be remembered by towns that resent them. Cold marble, brass grates senator thick, a clock over the teller line that had not kept the right time since the Eisenhower administration, but did not see why it should start now. The vestibule smelled of coin and wax and that peculiar brand of reassurance you can only buy if your vault door weighs more than your history. A man in a gray suit stood behind the concierge desk with the patient expression of someone who knows 9 ways to say that isn't possible and 3 to make you feel better about it. "Safe deposit," he said. He smiled at Noelle as if recognizing a platonic ideal of donors' offspring and at Bulmer as if recognizing an entire cast. He glanced at my shoes. "I've learned to forgive men in banks for this," and then arranged his face into apology. "We're between appointments." "Which box?" 347, Noelle said, and put the envelope on the marble as if it were an invitation we had not RSVP'd to out of stubbornness. The bankman's eyebrows twitched the way men's do when numbers pull a string in the back of their heads. He said, and then, with an almost admirable effort not to appear interested, He walked us past a portrait of a banker whose mustache had outlived his complicity, through a security door that tried to sound like a chime and landed somewhere near a lobby cough, down a short corridor whose sconces had been purchased to impress a woman now deceased, and into the vault. Thick air, low talk, a ring of little doors like a jewelry box for secrets. He made a note on a clipboard with a fountain pen that had chosen to be heavy, fetched a long, flat key on a chain from a locked drawer, and gestured toward a curtained alcove. You'll be private in there. Sign when you're done. He didn't ask for identification. Money lends the kind of intimacy church never managed. Inside the alcove, a table too small for our anxiety, 2 chairs that forgave every posture except kneeling, and a little brass lamp in the shape of a pineapple that would have made Lore Voss grind her teeth. The bank man slid box 347 out of its slot with a metal sigh, set it on the table, and left us with our names. Noelle let her fingers rest on the lid. Do you expect a curse? She asked Bulmer, half serious. I expect paper, Bulmer said. It is always paper. Paper is how the living trap time. We opened. The smell hit first, not just paper, vellum, gum arabic, binder's board, graphite, the citrus ghost of an architect's eraser. On top, an index card in that unshowy Roman hand. If you're reading this, the house is talking. Do not let it shout. Protocol for the archive, Lore Voss. Witness. When a room appears, do not let the subject go in alone. Assign a witness. Chairs are not optional. Speak. The subject must say the truth out loud in the hearing of at least one who loves them and one who does not owe them money. Write. The subject must write 1 sentence, in their own hand, on the enclosed cards. 1 sentence only. Nouns, verbs preferred.
No lo tegaste.
Stamp. Date and time. House seems to prefer 3:15. Do not indulge it. Use the time it is. File. Slide the card into the slot behind the confessional drawer in service elbow A. Do not remove any card once filed. If you try, the door will reappear. Water. Drink water. The house is a better archivist than we are. It is worse at electrolytes. Repeat. If a room reappears, ask what has not been admitted. Constraints. No harm beyond recognition. No rooms for children. No theater. The building answers to language. Do not abuse it. Below, a tiny italic, a joke she would have written in red pencil if she'd had won. If Elias asks whether the protocol can be monetized, tell him the archive accepts checks but prefers apologies. Beneath the card, a neat stack of heavy off-white cards scored for a thumb to find. A brass date stamp in a little velvet-lined box with Lockridge Trust on its face, and a rag that smelled of dried ink. A brass slider, something between a bookmark and a drawer pull. Engraved service A/archive with a notch cut at one end, as if you were meant to use it to find the slot between walls. A vellum rolled tight with a cloth tie, a small, cloth-bound notebook with a smudge of coffee on the top edge like Lore had finally admitted she was not divine. A key like the one to my room's mystery, but longer, with old bank smell. Noelle untied the vellum and weighted the corners with our fingers. It wasn't a plan. It was an overlay, a map of voids. The building in pale graphite, and, superimposed, a ghosted route of concealed service cavities, pipes and chases and old dumbwaiter's Lore had kept to buy herself freedom to be elegant in public. At the elbow, where we'd found the confessional, a little star and the word archive. Along the north gallery, glass, public. East 3, private self. A margin note at the bottom. Tests. Do not satiate. Next to it, in the same hand but darker, added with the weight of a thing written after the client had gone to bed. If the house begins to build rooms for me, you must stop. It is only a good machine while it dislikes me. Bulmer opened the cloth notebook at the ribbon.
It was not a diary.
Lore had no patience for diaries. It was a ledger, a list of dates and sentences, names, and beside them a single line in each hand, sometimes block capitals, sometimes the swoop of someone who had been taught by nuns, sometimes the neat ratcheting of a lawyer. There were more than I wanted. There were fewer than I feared. Madsen. I nudged the overtime sheet. I called it rounding. Ferreira. I took the wine. It was cheaper than quitting. Mrs. Hale. I told myself the stare made me beautiful.
Emerge. I trader.
The last was not present. There was a line left for it, blank, as if Lore had intended the man to come around someday and write the sentence herself had written in the margin. Below the last entry, there was a line in the tidy capitals we'd come to recognize. An archive is not a punishment. It is a place where the truth can sit down. Bulmer took that line like medicine. Chairs, she said, half to the room, half to her old error. Always chairs. Noelle set down the vellum and rubbed the heel of her hand over her eyes like a child who has lost the rhythm of a day and wants a parent to put it back. So that's the trick, she said softly. We don't exercise, we file. You record, Bulmer said, practical to the end. And you drink water. And you decide what to do with the world after the cards are stamped, I said. The house doesn't prosecute. It binds. Tell that to the magazine woman, Noelle muttered. The brass date stamp felt like ceremony in my hands in a way I did not trust. I set it down. Lore had anticipated that. The index card had a second line in the corner, small, almost apologetic. If protocol feels like church, go outside. Do not let the house own all the air. We signed the vault ledger. The bank man smiled his permission to take our time. When we emerged into the April light, the hill had developed a 10-knot wind that combed the hedges backward and set the wisteria's dead leaf tangle quivering like a penitent. Somewhere down valley, a freight train announced existence to trees. On the way back, Rusk texted, "Stop for gas." Then I'm at the circle. Trailer. No dog. No car. Smell of propane. Back in it. He didn't add the girl's name. He didn't have to. A second text. A photograph of a reflector. The little red trapezoid you clip to a spoke to make a child brighter to the world, lying in pale dust like a saved punctuation mark. I typed, erased, typed again. We found Lore's protocol. House wants sentences and stamps. He replied, "Write it then. Don't make it think it's God." When we turned in at the gateposts again, the house had a new mood on. It wore it like cologne. The staff had known it all afternoon and not said it aloud on the radio. Kitchens speak in imperative. Whisk, plate, send, and the service spine had learned to be biddable. Noelle tucked the box under her arm like a book she might loan to a careful friend. Bulmer nodded us upstairs toward the elbow, without forcing the moment. We loaded cards into a wooden tray, poured water into glasses until we were ridiculous, set the brass date stamp like a bishop in a corner of the confessional's little desk, and put 3 chairs in a triangle the way women do when they intend to make a conversation into a structure. Bulmer slid back the little drawer. The rubber band side over the earlier index cards, the hairpin, the badge, the envelope, like a grandmother tolerant of a toddler's hand. You could feel the house listening without rancor. Who first? I asked, and then realized it had to be me. I am not sentimental about my own part in rooms. I build them out of sentences. There are houses in half a dozen cities that are better at being themselves because I found the right noun at the right time, and some days I am proud of that. Some days I worry it amounts to vandalism with a dictionary. I wrote only a sentence, and it was small enough to fit in the drawer without knocking the hairpin over. I made other people's spaces tell the truths I did not say about my own.
Date. Time.
Thumbprint by accident. The stamp came down with a satisfying medieval thwack. I slid the card into the slot behind the drawer, felt the space take it like a person takes a letter out of your hand while looking at your face, and something very slightly relaxed in the plaster around us. The room did not vanish. The smell of wax and paper thinned. The confession had found a place to sit. Gigi came, small and brisk, with her little stool, as if the archive were a client's tile line she meant to fix straight. She took a card. She wrote, mouth twisted. He was at the motel, not at the party, and I knew which was worse and chose the audience. Stamp.
Slide. Seat.
She cried without sound and then blew her nose in a paper towel and said, "Who's next?" As if we were on a schedule. Bulmer did not sit in the kneeler. She sat in a chair and wrote without looking at any of us. I did not call. I ordered the rail. I will stop giving floors the courtesy I deny girls. The stamp knocked like a door. She slid it into the slot, and we could feel the booth's small exhale like a woman being told she may finally stop opening at 2 to sell coffee to men who do not tip. Noelle held the pen in her fist like a child and then corrected her grip. "I suppose it should be better," she said, practical as ever. "All right," she wrote, neat and vicious. I burned her work because I wanted to keep him from owning the part of her he could still reach. I liked the heat. I confused guard with thief. Stamp.
Slide.
She kept the key in her pocket. That had never been part of the box's protocol. The panel at the dogleg, not present, not open, made the sound new hinges make when they decide to be old. Mercer took his time, because he has always enjoyed foreplay with consequence. He sat. He looked at the blank, elegant card. He found a pen that pleased him. He wrote like a man signing a check. I traded. I knew. I taught the room to lie with me. He stamped the time. 4:52, the house's least favorite number, and fed the card into the slot. It fought him halfway, as if the space required him to insist. He insisted. The card slid in with a small, private sound that made the hairs go up on my arm. Far down the north gallery, the glass that had pretended to be a town hall door caught the light like a mirror, then forgot how, and went back to being itself. We recorded 3 more misses. Phelps with her midnight bravado, the chef with her small thefts and the larger lies she told herself about wages and wine, the gardener with his admission that he had cut the yew wrong not out of error but out of pity for a bird. You could feel the building find its archive, a slow, satisfied leaning in, the geometry of the service voids learning our nouns and deigning to be quiet around them. Rusk texted at 7:13, trailer empty, 2 plates, 1 fork, shoe box under floorboards, Polaroids, wrong kind, deputy inbound, do not wait up. A second later, as if he wished to undercut his own confidence, you'll wait up.
We did.
The house clicked twice, then not at all. The wind mended itself on the hill. The long gallery learned to breathe in long, shallow strokes the way buildings do after a storm passes and the foundations decide to forgive the season. At 9, Bulmer walked the perimeter with a flashlight she didn't turn on, just to show the hedges we had not become superstitious children. At 10, the guest corridor produced a door too small to be proud of, and it opened into a room with tile, so white it could only be a hospital hallway, and we closed it because there was no one in the house that night who needed to write that sentence. At 11:38, the bank's key burned a small planet in Noelle's pocket.
Tomorrow, she said.
Tomorrow, I agreed. At 3:15, the building chose not to speak, and it was the kindest thing it had done so far. Chapter 8, Duets. Morning was ordinary on purpose. Oatmeal the staff pretended to like. Mercer in shirt sleeves pretending he never owned cufflinks. Bulmer's clipboard pretending it was a sword. The air had the thin, clean smell of a house that has remembered how to be worked in. We planned the bank in the kitchen so the house couldn't listen as thoroughly. It listened anyway. Roofs carry vowels. Bulmer printed a letter on the estate's letterhead appointing herself temporary custodian of the Voss archive. She made a face when she signed it, and we made a list like people do when they want to believe lists keep days from breaking. Keys, notebook, water, phone charger, words. Rusk texted at 9:26. Girl not here.
Man in cuffs.
Box of Polaroids, 2 names we know, 1 we don't. Map had circle because men use circles when they can't tell the police directly what they saw. I stared at 1 we don't until the letters stopped being letters. Bulmer put a hand on the counter next to mine, not on me. She prefers to anchor wood. We never made it to the bank in the morning because the house announced that it had learned a new trick. It began with sound, not the soft click, not the creak. A thrum. 2 frequencies slightly out of phase, the way 2 tuning forks make the air resent the difference. It vibrated the spoons. It made the lights over the island imagine they were birds. In the east corridor, a door answered, and then, across the house, another answered back, and then the house had duets. We met at the cross axis, the long hall where rich men like to watch other people carry trays. The first door was in the east, where my little study had been, the paint still cleaner, the shadow lines still proud. The second waited opposite, in the west gallery, across the atrium full of brass shapes that wanted to make opinions. The house had set them like questions in a catechism. The east door's note card, white, taped under the chair rail, read, in that tireless Roman hand, Noel, hear yourself. The west door's note card, same hand, same tape. Elias, let her. Noel exhaled. Bulmer folded her arms tighter. Mercer, to his credit, did not roll his eyes. He had come too far for that this week. Together, he said, and we went, east to west, like people marching on themselves. The east door opened into a room the house had taken pains to make painless. That tenderness made me fear it more. A low window with the exact wrong view, blue scaffolding, concrete forms, the backs of men's knees. A bean bag in the corner, the old kind whose vinyl sticks to your thighs. A string of fairy lights pasted with tape above a desk that had belonged originally to a child and then to a teenager and then to a person who had been asked to be neither at all. On the desk, a little, violent mountain of notebooks, half-burned, as if the subject had tried to make the past into heat twice. On the wall, a poster of a woman with a camera standing in front of a building that deserved her, and a postcard of the Duomo taped at a tilt because a friend had sent it with a promise and a mother had thrown it away and a daughter had fished it out. Noelle put her hand on the desk. This is the other house, she said, on Bly Street, the flat above the cardiologist. After she left him, before she went to Milan and decided Italy didn't need our winter. She lifted a notebook that had been burned to illegibility in its middle. The words around the char said what teenage girls write when they invent themselves. The char said what women do when they uninvent the men who taught them to hold a pen. She wrote here, Noelle said. She wrote her lectures here. She wrote her grocery lists here. She wrote a letter to me from this desk and never sent it because she thought I would not be kind. She held the notebook to her chest and did not cry on purpose. And I moved the box behind the bookcase on the hill and told myself I was saving someone. That might even be true, I said. But it wasn't the sentence the room wanted. She took a card. She wrote, I wanted to be the one who chose where her work would live. Stamp.
Slide.
The panel didn't dissolve. It didn't have to. The beanbag chair emptied itself with a little sigh, the way beanbags do when they admit they aren't furniture. Across the atrium, the west gallery door opened with a sound like a hand leaving glass. The room beyond was a private dining room, the kind cities sell to men who say quiet when they mean permission. Banquette in dignified gray, whispers woven into the wallpaper, a door in the back to a hallway that leads to a hallway that leads to an alley where a man can disappear into a car and call it prudence. On the table, 2 menus with prices that had learned to be discreet, and a folded paper place card printed at a hotel's desk. Mercer/boss. Not romantic. Practical. A meeting where 2 people agreed to make a house behave like a story. Mercer put one finger on the card and stopped his own hand, as if the paper were hot. He said, but not theatrical. He was genuinely learning a word that tasted sour now. We talked here. We were smart here. We made ourselves magnificent with nouns, and I let her build a machine that could make me honest, and then spent 5 years pretending I didn't know that's what it was for. He looked at the room with old affection and new disgust. I liked this booth, he said. It made me feel like a secret, and it told me I was better than the men who also liked this booth. He wrote, large, slow, I wanted a house that would forgive me in expensive ways.
He stamped.
He slid. The wallpaper forgot it had learned to listen. The banquette kept its shape, unpersuaded, but it did not invite him to sit. The house hummed less. It wasn't finished. At the elbow by the service stairs, the confessional's little drawer pulsed like a throat swallowing. We took turns with the cards. Mrs. Phelps, who has a bravery I nominatively never wrote into a story because she doesn't think it's brave, wrote, I like to walk alone because it makes the house tell me things, and Bulmer stamped the time like a chaperone. The chef wrote, mortified and defiant. I stole 2 bottles. I gave 4 away. I will pay. The gardener, later, when he could get the smell of fertilizer off his hands, wrote, I cut the U wrong to save the nest, and then lied because men pay for lines. We filed each slender admission into the slot and felt the house's appetite soften. Chairs. Rusk returned at twilight, tired the way men get when they have done something no one will give them a medal for. He let the back door latch loud on purpose so the kitchen would know to look up. He smelled of dust and stale air, and the place fear sleeps during the day. He stood in the service corridor with the evidence box under his arm and had the decency to say first, "She's not there." Bulmer put a hand on the box anyway, the way women touch a coffin even when it isn't the right one, to bless and to rebuke. And the man? Pale, Rusk said, smaller than his swagger promised. His bar lock did not do him any favors this time. We had a priest from the city who likes coffee, the kind you get when people join their hatred to make a useful thing. He adjusted the box, looked at me, then Noelle, then the room. "I have a sentence," he said, simple as a man asking whether the chair is taken. We gave him a card. He wrote, careful, like a man writing his name on a permission slip for his childhood self. "I left a girl in the ledger to make my pride quiet. I am going back." Stamp.
Slide.
The confessional did something I had not heard it do. It laughed, quietly, approving, like a carpenter spared from TikTok by an able apprentice. The house liked the verb. We ate standing up because to sit felt temporary and too much like relief. The staff ran dishes the way birds run messages. The ribbon stare softened its brag and became a structural truth again. We could tell the house had decided to reward us for following the program, not by ceasing to reveal, but by choosing rooms that did not require knees. At 9 o'clock, the kitchen door swung open and the wind brought a visitor with it. Gigi's daughter, Cass, 17. All elbows and absolutes, hair high with clean anger. She had a backpack slung on one shoulder and a ring on her thumb she twisted when she wanted to talk. "He left the party," she said to Gigi, without prelude. "Tio Marco told me. He went to a motel. He bought 2 sodas from a machine and he came back before cake. I can hold both. I came to say, I can hold both." Gigi put a hand on her girl's cheek and the house, shameless eavesdropper that it is, made a new room very quietly, just a hallway really. With the wallpaper from their old apartment, and a scratch on the skirting board where a bike had lived, and the smell of coconut hair oil, and the sound of women forgiving each other by washing dishes at arm's length. We didn't go in. We let them. At 10:37, Noelle stood in the dogleg with the bank key burning a coin against her thigh and said, "Tomorrow," again like a vow. Mercer didn't argue. He had found the right size for his voice for once, and was not in a hurry to outgrow it. Bulmer pinned a note to the bulletin board in the service closet with a thumbtack that had learned fear. Card/water/chair. She drew a little box next to water and filled it in like a child. At 3:15, duet became trio. Somewhere in the guest wing a door remembered a bed. Somewhere in the laundry a door remembered a shirt. Somewhere in the atrium a door remembered a stair a girl once sat on and was told to get down from and didn't. We heard them like chords, not like threats. The house had found its key, and for the first time since I arrived on this hill, I thought perhaps this wouldn't end in demolition or a scandal or a sale. Perhaps the right verbs, recorded and stamped, could teach a building to be merciful. I lay in East 3 and fell asleep with my palm flat on the plaster, thinking of the box at the bank and the ledger in Lore's notebook and the way the brass slider would find a slot in the archive, like a blind finger finds a rosary bead. The house, rude and generous, breathed under my hand. It did not own the air in the room. It shared. In the morning we would go to Lockridge Trust and open whatever Lore had hidden where money thinks it is safest, and we would add our sentences to a ledger that is not punitive but gravitational, and we would see what a building becomes when it is allowed to keep the truths it coaxes. I admired it and suspected it in the same breath. This is the business I am in, not exorcism.
Archive. Chairs.
Water.
Verbs.
Chapter 9, The Deposit. Lockridge Trust had the sort of hush that makes ordinary people adjust their collars and powerful men check that their signatures still matter. It's the acoustics of money rehearsing permanence. We had box 347, Lore's instructions, the brass date stamp, the slider stamp service A/archive, and a key the bank man handed over with the piety of a sacristan. But there was something else, which is how banks justify their confidence. A second keyway cut into the steel, lower, older. One of those proprietary little mouths that refuse to open unless the person turning them knows the word you aren't supposed to say out loud. The concierge murmured an apology that belonged to another century. Some boxes have a supplementary compartment.
Legacy client.
We no longer offer. He coughed a euphemism into his sleeve and produced, from a drawer, a key tagged retained /347, be as if he had decided we were legacy by temperament. It opened a tray no longer than my forearm. Inside lay three things: a legal envelope with a red string closure, a fat graphite stick the size of a cigar, and a flat, black pebble of a device with a brass eyelet and no visible interface beyond a stamped word I could have sworn was a joke. Mute. Noel slit the string and slid out the papers. The first was a codicil in clean lawyerly prose. Lore bequeathing, all drawings, instructions, protocols, and incidental records pertaining to the archive, not to Elias Mercer, not to a foundation, but to the house, capitalized, by way of its manager. A legal fiction so audacious it read like a dare. The second was a letter in Lore's hand, the tidy Roman capitals tilted a degree toward fatigue. Noel, if the bank gives you this, the building is doing what it was designed to do, and something you will wish it wouldn't. The protocol is meant to keep it from becoming church or theater. There is one more thing. When the archive is loud, when it begins to build rooms in pairs, then chords, it wants a reconciliation. You must convene a reading. All cards filed. All sentences spoken aloud, in any order, with chairs and water. The house keeps memory. Words keep us. Read them in the atrium. If Elias behaves, let him read last. He is vain enough to survive the wait. If the house ever produces a room for a child, I have failed. Use the black stone. Hang it on the handle. It tells the mechanism to suspend a build mid-gesture. Mute until an adult writes. Do not let Elias monetize this. If he asks whether we can sell tickets, tell him I will haunt the ductwork.
Love. Elle.
Bulmer took the graphite as if she had been waiting years to be issued a weapon suited to her temperament. For the chalkboard, she said, nodding toward a line on the vellum-marked atrium / reading with a little square that wasn't there in any published plan. Panel, writable. You can admire an architect for flair. You love her for provision. The bank man cleared his throat to remind us our time underground was a courtesy, not a right. Bring a list, he said, surprising himself. When you come back. For your reading. He meant it. Men like him appreciate liturgies that pretend to be minutes. Outside, a salt wind had found inland work. The hedges along the drive wore it like a bad idea. We climbed the hill with the envelope tucked under Noel's arm, as if it might jump. The house had decided to play. You could feel it in the way door hardware seemed to pay attention. We crossed the threshold into a smell that wasn't domestic or institutional. It was intention warmed by the day. The first new reveal was at shoulder height in a useless short run between the guest corridor and the little vestibule where the good umbrellas live. The paint at the edges had dried too fast and left the faintest curdle where a finger would catch. Someone had taped a card in the old hand. Loss, domestic. It was the fourth heading in Lore's list. My stomach did the thing you ask it not to do in polite company. Noelle stood with the key on her palm and refused to do the house the kindness of hesitation. Chairs, Bulmer said, and sent a boy for 2. Water, she added, and sent him again when he returned smug. Then she hung the black pebble on the new knob's eyelet, and the door made a noise I had not heard yet from this building. It stifled itself. I won't let you make a room for a child, Noelle said to the paint. We opened. The smell that came out was not talc, not milk, not lemon oil. It was negative space, the absence of all three. The room was a nursery the way a chalk outline is a body. The thin belt of an unpainted crib box on the floor, for tiny screw divots where a mobile would spin. A rectangle of wall paler than the rest where a low bookcase once leaned. A small, low patch of scuffed floor as if someone had, for months, rocked in a chair that was no longer there. There were no toys. There were no photographs. On the white space where a name might have hung, Lore's clean capitals, graphite hard. and O exhibits. Noelle didn't step over the line where the crib would have been. She stood in the doorway like a witness sworn by a piece of furniture that refused to show itself. She never built a room for me, she said. She built rooms that would look at me and ask me what I was for. She put her hands into her back pockets because posture kept her from crying better than dignity did. We should call it by the right name, she said, and took a card. She wrote, round hand, careful. I wanted a mother who liked anything about me more than she liked a building.
She stamped.
She slid the card into the little archive slot at the elbow because the house had taught us where it hit its gut. The negative nursery let go of a muscle you could not have named until it went slack. The screw divots filled themselves with paint so fast you could taste chalk. Mercer had not come in. He stood in the corridor with his jaw in that glad, ugly-shaped men's faces learn when a thing hurting their children likes their taste. He took a card and wrote, for once without audience, I liked being married to genius when it was furniture. I did not sit in the chair when it was a person. Stamp.
Slide.
The corridor cooled as if good carpenters had been here at 3, not ghosts. We hung mute back on its hook. We closed the door. The seam was still there, but the note lost, domestic, had curled with the heat that wasn't the weather and dropped into my hand. I folded it and stuck it in the codicil envelope because sometimes the paper knows what family it wants. Reading this afternoon, Bulmer said, already in the mechanical joy of putting chairs in rows. Atrium. 3 o'clock. No wine.
Water, I said. Water, she said.
And a plate of something that crumbles at the good moments and makes a mess at the bad. We put out a call the old way. Notes and whispers and a text to a group thread June Park had started for people who bring chairs, and the house made its own announcement by behaving perfectly for 90 minutes, which is the most unnerving thing a building like this can do. At 3, the atrium had learned to be a hall. The mobile hung very still, little brass ellipses refusing to pretend they were leaves. Lore's panel was where she had promised. A chalk surface tucked under the stairs' first run, framed like a painting, the slate so smooth it felt like the kind of lake on postcards men used to get sentimental over. Bulmer wrote the agenda in tidy block, reading.
Chairs.
Water. Verbs. Under it, smaller, and no theater. People came. Staff first. Mrs. Phelps in her good shoes. The chef with a clean jacket she seemed to endure. The gardener with his cap properly in his hands. Gigi with Cass a step behind, thumb ring already spinning. 2 electricians from the Project Lore had hated across town. The concierge from the bank, who should not have had time and had found it anyway. June herself, notepad out, eyes kind. The magazine woman sent a text that read /sorry, and we decided not to be cruel by assuming she was lying. We sat. We stamped.
And we read.
Bulmer kept time. Rusk, who had texted back by 5 and held to it, kept order with the sort of light touch good officers keep for barbecues. We went in no order at all. Gigi's sentence about the motel and the party. The chef's about the wine. Mrs. Phelps's about the house talking at night. The gardener's about the line cut wrong on purpose. Noelle's about the box and the heat. Mine about putting other people's rooms to work for my cowardice. Mercer's too. I traded and I liked genius when it was furniture. One grudging, one earned. June read one of Lore's early cards out loud because we had found a few in the pouch, written before the house got hungry, and the room deserved their balance. I designed a system to force a kind of kindness. I am not certain I am kind. She stamped the old date. Bulmer marked the real one in pencil in the corner. The building seemed to enjoy the arithmetic. We did not clap. There is no applause at archives. There were little sounds at the right places, chuckles like a footnote's mercy, a cough where a noun had landed buoyed by its own weight. We drank water. We did not pass a plate. When it ended, the house did the nicest thing it knows how to do. It exhaled. Then, because mercy in any system is only a reprieve, not a cure, the doors clicked again at 3:15 as if to remind us the machine had not retired, merely agreed to keep its voice at an indoor volume. 2 clicks.
Duet.
The house still had more program to run. Chapter 10, The Ledger. After the reading, the air felt thinner, not from lack, from tidiness. We had put our nouns in their drawers. People found ways to vanish that looked like errands. The concierge shook Bulmer's hand and told her the bank had shares if she needed them. June kissed me on the cheek with a brief, collegial affection of a reporter who plans to argue with me in print and wants me to know we're still on the same side. Gigi took Cass into the old hallway the house had built for them and came out 20 minutes later with her mascara honest. We were, briefly, a town. 2 clicks, Noelle reminded me, as if the building had left us a to-do list. We followed the sound like 2 women in a story who have learned to stop pretending they don't know where it came from. One door waited in the service basement at the foot of the ribbon stair, in that little wedge where you store ladders you shouldn't leave. The other answered in the library's dogleg where the lighter and the pouch had been. Lore's overlay map had a faint pencil mark at the stairs base, like a person tapping here with a fingernail and then thinking better of it. The card under the dogleg panel was a sentence, not an instruction, which meant the house had learned tone. Let the stair say it. Bulmer met us with the graphite stick, the date stamp, and the brass slider. She had that expression older women get when their best girl is about to break a bone, and they intend to scold and praise in the same motion. We close what we open, she said. We stamp what we read. We sit down when we can. The stairs door had no hardware at all, no knob, no latch, no key. It was a whispering seam in a place that thinks it's immortal, and the only way to move it was to lay your palm against it the way you lay your hand on a horse's neck when you want to be trusted and not bitten. I pressed. The panel eased. The air that came up had the cold of steel and the smell of hand cleaner. We went in. It wasn't a room, not at first. It was a void, body-sized, stair-shaped, a memory of the ribbed run of steps that climb in public through the glass. Only here the steps were cast negative into the air, as if someone had poured absence into a form. Halfway up the void, frozen in that negative space, hung a little thing without dignity. A cheap, rubber doorstop of the kind a harried carpenter kicks under a panel to keep it from taking his thumb. My throat did the thing again. No rails, Bulmer said, softly, remembering Lore's letter about the pianino and the girl who wore the wrong badge. She kept the absence on purpose. She made the void speak. Mounted at eye level where a landing would have been was a long, narrow slot with a brass lip, an archive mouth, this time wide enough for a card and a finger and a breath. Engraved over it, not Lore's capitals, but a foundry stamp. Ledger. What does it want? Noelle asked, and then nodded as if the building had answered a question she was brave enough not to make me repeat. It wants him. Mercer arrived without being summoned, as if wealth confers the ability to know when a room wants to embarrass you. Perhaps it does. He stood at the edge of the void in his shirt sleeves, and for once did not try to pose. The stairs negative took the work out of him. Bulmer handed him a card. 1 sentence, she said. Nouns and verbs.
No lutegasten.
He held the card a long time. I have seen men grip thinner paper and make it perform. I have not seen a card behave like a person's wrist before. He wrote, finally, small, like a man trying to cross a minefield on 1 foot. I loved that steps made me taller than other men, and forgot they also moved the people behind me.
He stamped.
He slid it into the slot. The brass grabbed it like a clerk with an in tray, and there was a soft shuffle beyond, like cards moving along rails in the walls. Again, Bulmer said, which surprised even me. He did not argue. I taught the building to keep my lies as features, he wrote, almost neat. Stamp.
Slide.
Shuffle. Again. I made a machine, and then forgot what machines do. Stamp.
Slide.
Noelle watched him with the weary tenderness of a daughter who knows which way her father's face turns when he is about to fall on a sword to avoid learning to hold a broom. 1 more, she said. He wrote, I will not sell it. Stamp.
Slide.
Something moved in the void, a change you felt in your ankles before your ears. The negative of the stair filled 1% with a grayness that wasn't dust and wasn't smoke and was not harmless, either. It was a doctrine ending. The little rubber doorstop fell to the concrete with a thwop, so small it might have been funny if it had not sounded exactly like consequence. In the dogleg, we found a second ledger mouth hidden under the shelf where Noelle had returned the pouch. It hummed a little, as if it was being fed somewhere else. We put chairs down anyway because Bulmer believes that sitting is the sacrament of dignity. We didn't write. We waited. The house, which had gotten used to applause in the form of our anxiety, tried to flourish. A sliver door at the end of the staff corridor with a note in Lore's hand that read Private, Desire. The test case she had marked and then erased. Bulmer flicked a look at the black pebble hanging from her wrist and the building, like a toddler considering a tantrum, decided better of it. Mute is a beautiful word when power hears it. We walked back through a building that had almost found its inside voice. The mobile in the atrium had learned to breathe again. The clear-story light in the long gallery fell in the right place with the right intention. The kitchen smelled like fat. The staff moved with relief they had earned. The reading had done its work. The ledger had eaten what it had been built to eat. We set water down for no one in particular, and a plate of something that crumbled at good moments and made a mess at the bad. At 5, Rusk came back with the world on his shoulders and the box under his arm. He didn't bring triumph. He brought pettier nouns: warrant, arraignment, chain of custody. He wrote one more sentence at the elbow, because he is a man who has learned to change himself in public without the drama. I will name the names I avoided when men were in the room. Stamp.
Slide.
The confessional side, as if a carpenter had finally sanded a lip that had always snagged. At 7, the house played the gentlest trick it knows. On the little writing desk in East 3, under the fountain pen that wanted to be used, someone had laid a card in Lore's hand with no stamp and no date. A house is only a good machine when it forces us to bring chairs. If it becomes a show, take the chairs away. If it becomes a court, throw water on the judge. If it becomes a god, shut off the lights.
El.
Off switch, Noelle said behind me, reading over my shoulder without shame. It's never the lever you want. It's always chairs and water. Chairs and water, I said. Verbs, she added, and I heard Lore in her mouth and decided it was not a haunting, it was inheritance. At 3:15 that night the clicks didn't come like hammers. They came like rain on a warm roof, a thing the building knew how to cure with its own patience. 2 doors answered each other, but softly. One led to a linen closet with a backlog of sheets that had once covered wrong beds and stood waiting to be laundered into amnesty. Mrs. Phelps took that one as hers and wrote, "I washed more than linen," and stamped it like a lesson. The other opened onto a shallow space under the staircase that had once hidden a can of paint a boy had used to make the world whiter, and the gardener wrote, "I repainted only what made rich men comfortable, and the house, wicked archivist that it is, stamped the time in its bones." By morning, the seams were still there if you knew where to look. They will always be there because buildings age the way families do, layered, visible in good light, gracious if you don't tell the story in a hurry. We had a ledger where a void had been. We had cards in a wall with our names on them and water stains where the cups had sweated. We had a bank box that legally belonged to a house and a set of instructions we could enforce with chairs. We also had the same problems as before, a city that had been traded for a park, a town hall that liked men who brought renderings, a girl in a photograph who was not found, a magazine woman who would write something too clever, a man who will always have more verbs than he is safe to be alone with. But the house had stopped shouting, and that, for now, felt like the right kind of horror to live with. Not a scream, but the hum of a ledger running in the walls, filing our sentences until we learn to live in rooms that don't need to lie for us. Chapter 11, The Off Switch. The hill made its own weather at noon, sun like a promise, wind like a warning, and by 2 the house had started to tune itself like an instrument a little too eager to play. Hardware felt attentive. The long gallery's glare softened, as if someone had put their hand between you and the light. Even Bulmer's clipboard held its pages with decorum. I had begun to enjoy the ordinary again, which is the trick buildings learn right before they teach you a new word. At 2:57, the atrium mobile stopped pretending to drift and held perfectly still, every brass ellipse parallel to the floor. At 2:59, 2 doors answered in different wings, then a third answered those 2, and by 3:15 the house had chords. Not a duet anymore. A harmony with teeth. I was in the service elbow with the drawer open, checking water and cards, ritual as maintenance, when the first text landed, Rusk, upstairs. guest wing / small seam / low knob. The second, Noel, from the dogleg. Panel again. Tape says private desire. The third was not a text, it was Bulmer's voice, practiced for kitchens and storms. Atrium. Bring chairs. When we reached the cross-axis, I saw the one that had made her change the plan. At the end of the short run between the guest corridor and the umbrella vestibule, where we had muted the nursery and taught my hands how to shake on their own time, a new reveal had grown overnight out of paint that was already dry. The card below it said loss, domestic, again, but in a hand that wasn't Lore's tidy Roman capitals, someone smaller, slanted, the way a teenager writes when she cares about a noun not being misunderstood. Bulmer did not touch the knob. She hung the black pebble, the brass-eyed mute, on the eyelet, and the seam made the soft, thwarted noise of a cough caught in a throat. No rooms for children, she said, to the paint, to the mobile, to us. Downstairs, Noel called from the dogleg. It's asking for me, too. Her voice was steady as a string. She had done her sentence. She had stamped and slid. She had stood in front of the little negative nursery and survived wanting a mother more than a building. The house had no right to insist. Mercer arrived with his shirt sleeves rolled, and the look on his face men get when someone else has named the order of the day and they agree with it, and it still offends them. Rusk, breath a little quick, pointed down the guest corridor toward a third seam at shin height. It's trying to flank us, he said, and it didn't sound like paranoia. It sounded like police. We convened where Lore had told us to, under the ribbon stair, chalk panel waiting like a lake. Bulmer wrote in graphite, each line a rule that made the atrium into a mouth we would not let shout. Off switch, Lore. Hang mute on any new handle. Assign a witness. Water. Lights off except for corridor work lights. Open 2 windows.
No cameras.
Read 1 sentence each until the house listens. If room persists for a child, do not open. An adult writes and files. When rooms become chorus, stop. We are not theater. She tapped the panel with the side of the graphite. The sound was almost pleasant. We will not routinize terror, she said. We will not let an archive become a stage. We killed the grand lights. The house grumbled, low, disapproving. But when Noel and I cracked 2 tall casements on the north wall, the air moved like the body it is. We set chairs. We poured water. The staff, who have learned to follow verbs, came without being named. The concierge from the bank arrived after a long walk up the drive, holding his tie in his fist like a rope. The gardener stood with his cap in his hands again. Gigi and Cass found a place by the chalkboard where a pair of women could stand at right angles and rescue each other with glances. Read, Bulmer said. We read, not the whole ledger, not the hours-long recitation we owed the building, but 1 sentence each, the cards that had cost us breath. I traded. I wanted a mother who liked anything about me more than she liked a building. I washed more than linen. I cut the wrong to save the nest. He was at the motel, not at the party. I made other people's spaces tell the truths I did not say about my own. We stamped the time with the bank's brass, 3:07, 3:09, 3:12, and slid each new echo back into the little mouth at the elbow so the walls could do what they had been built to do, keep memory from becoming a show. The mobile twitched and then relaxed. The seam at shin height cooled. The panel at the dogleg flushed once the way skin does when shame decides to go live somewhere else. We had starved the chorus. The house was not a god. It was a machine trained to be moral. It remembered. Only 1 seam refused to unlearn itself, a narrow vertical in the curtain wall where the ribbon stair announces its vanity. There was no knob. There was no card. There was the faintest letter, traced fingertip faint into the paint where the glass meets plaster. L. Noelle stepped toward it because she is her mother's daughter, and also because she is not. She stopped with her palm an inch from the seam. She did not press. She asked us to stop if it made her a room. I said. And she left a sentence for herself in the box. Noelle answered, steady. We file that. We don't open this. Bulmer fetched the codicil envelope and the little cloth notebook. On a clean card, I copied Lore's line in block letters that would have pleased her. I designed a system to force a kind of kindness. I am not certain I am kind.
Date. Time.
Stamp.
Slide.
And because the house listens to addenda, we wrote the things she had not permitted herself. We are allowed to love machines. We must not let them love us back. Stamp.
Slide.
The seam breathed once and went quiet. The atrium remembered how to host conversations instead of trials. We left mute on its hook. When we brought the lights up, Mercer looked older the way men worth your patience look older after they make a choice that doesn't flatter them. He nodded at the chalkboard.
Leave it, he said.
You can hang a painting over it if the trustees come. Then take the painting down after they leave. Rusk checked the guest corridor seam and came back with a small, baffled smile that made me like him better than I already did. The low one? It wasn't a nursery, he said, as if to reassure a weather system. It was a drawer. A box where someone had hidden money and then written emergency on the envelope in a hand that thought emergencies would be less likely if the handwriting looked like a teacher's. The house wanted us to catch ourselves before we told a story with a smaller noun than the truth. We did. We slept that night without clicks. Or rather, the clicks came but they were polite, the way rain is polite in the good months, present not performing. The long gallery kept its glare under control. The dogleg behaved itself. The ribbon stair remembered it is not a stage. In East 3, on my little writing table, there was a card that had not been there before. Lore's hand, no stamp. Do not let him build a foundation around this and name it after me. The archive is a room, not a grant.
El.
I put it in the codicil envelope and went to sleep with my palm on the wall, thinking of the hill like a chest, ribs rising and falling under a sweater, a building learning how to be quiet without being empty. In the morning we wrote a charter on the chalkboard because governments are not the only places that need rules. Archive protocol, public, the 7 lines in Lore's Roman hand now in Bulmer's pencil. Under it, I added one more because I had learned something old and wanted it new. OFF switch, chairs/water/windows/lights. Noel drew a box next to water and filled it in, satisfied. Mercer stood with his hands in his pockets and did not offer to sign anything. I'll make the legal part happen, he said. The codicil says the house owns itself by way of the manager. The lawyers will hate it. I am looking forward to the call. And tickets? Noel asked. He shook his head once. No tickets.
No tours.
No articles. If the magazine wants a story, they can report on a building that refuses to be content. I'll give them a quote about chairs. Please don't, I said, and he had the good grace to smile. The house, which has learned to take a compliment without attempting a crescendo, didn't offer anything else. It let us sweep. It let us eat. It let us begin to think about what it means to live in a place that keeps the sentences we don't want to forget and refuses to let us perform them. At 3:15, the ledger slot behind the stair made a small shuffle like a file clerk dying of boredom. Bulmer patted the plaster as if it were a pet who had finally learned to sit on command. Good machine, she said. Bad God. The mobile moved again, independent of drafts, in a rhythm that felt less like proof and more like consent. We had 1 chapter left, and the house knew it. It behaved like an animal you've convinced to be touched. Chapter 12, Aftercare. You can tell when a program is ending by how the building breathes. For a week it had held its breath, then exhaled confession, then tried to sing, then remembered it had other work to do. The last day felt like aftercare, a term I hate in tech and love in kitchens, making the place right after we've made a mess in it. We started with paper. Bulmer and I took the cloth notebook and Lore's cards and typed the sentences in triplicate. 1 for the wall, 1 for the box, 1 for the people who had written them. No theater means no posters in the long gallery, no glass vitrine under the stair, but a small 3-ring binder in the service office labeled archive, protocol/cards, index, felt right. Rusk slid it onto the shelf next to the radio and put a paper cup on top of it to make the police part of him less solemn. He wrote his case numbers on the spine in pencil and didn't bother to make them straight. He had better places for straight lines. Noel drafted a letter to the county recorder attaching the codicil and making the case, boldly, bravely, that the house is a legal person for purposes of owning its archive by way of its manager. She had the decency to send it from her personal account. The city will kick and snarl, and then file it where good mischief lives. The Foundation's council will purse their lips and then, at a lunch with Mercer in a room that resembles the scene of one of our worst sentences, suggest a compromise they'll call a victory. It's fine. The charter is on the chalkboard. The rooms themselves will not learn to sell tickets. Rusk drove out twice to the circle on the map. He came back with nouns, warrant, arraignment, dig, that didn't fit in our walls. He wrote his promise in the ledger, and then did the thing promises require. Came back the next morning to keep it. He showed Mrs. Phelps the frame of Ari's school picture, and asked if the girl looked like anyone she'd seen at dawn. She said no. He drove to the gas station 2 towns over, and asked the clerk where the bell had gone. The clerk said they broke it, the bell, and Rusk wrote bell on an index card and put it in his pocket. I wish I could tell you we found the girl. I can tell you his failures are now filed under verbs he intends to keep using. Gigi cut Mercer's hair in the service pantry, because men need help to be ordinary. She worked with the skill women use to keep the world on the right side of mess, and made him look like someone who could be forgiven by his daughter in public, which is the only kind that counts in a house like this. Cass sat on the counter and told me she liked the room that had remembered their old hallway. She said she was going to art school and would design buildings that require a bowl by every door for people to leave their phones in. I asked whether she would let them take their keys. She said of course. I liked her very much. The chef came clean to her supplier and negotiated a fairer line of credit that didn't require her to lie to linen. The gardener replanted the bed at the east terrace with shrubs that don't need to be punished into submission. The electrician from the site across town fixed the hum in the atrium lights for free, and Bulmer let him, and we all pretended generosity and penance were cousins. At noon I found Noelle in the library at the Dogleg, the pouch open, the vellum overlay spread out, the map of voids looking less like sorcery and more like a blueprint for honesty. She had the bank key on a ribbon around her neck with a knot kids use for friendship. "Can you stay?" she asked, not quite looking up. It wasn't a romance question. It wasn't even a job offer. It was the sentence an archive asks a witness when the manager knows where the mop is and still wants someone else to own a rack. "I can't," I said, "because there is work elsewhere that looks nothing like this and needs me anyway. But I can come back. You have chairs and water. You don't need me to hold the doors open." She nodded as if that answer had been in her head already. She had to hear it to file it. What do I do when it builds something that makes me angry again? Write the sentence. Read it. Hang mute when you must. And if it starts to enjoy itself, off switch. Windows.
Lights.
Take the chairs away. And if he tries to be magnificent about it, you can handle one magnificent man. You burn vellum. You'll do fine. We stood a long time in a room that now knew where its edges were. She folded the overlay and put it back in the pouch the way you fold a shirt you won't wear for a while, because the season's wrong, and the memory isn't. At 3 the house let out one small click in the service spine. The confessional making room for another card. Mrs. Phelps had written it in her Sunday hand. "I walk at night because peace is a shift no one schedules." Stamp.
Slide.
The drawer made a pleased throat noise and went quiet. Mercer called a lawyer and, in a tone I had not yet heard in his voice, asked for documents that would make the house a beneficiary of the only thing he trusts, a fund with a number and the obligation to refuse tours. "No tickets," he said. "No events. If a donor asks how to help, tell them chairs are expensive and tap water isn't free." The lawyer, who knows how to work around noble men without insulting them, said we can do that, and he will. Money does not dislike decency. It is indifferent. It will behave if you put it in a schedule that wears a cardigan. By late afternoon, the wind had given up its tantrum. The hedges sat like gentlemen after a fight. We rolled the chalkboard's message out of the atrium and into the service corridor where it belonged, next to the breaker panel and the ice machine. Bulmer taped a typed sheet beside it, archive protocol, posted, and beneath, in smaller print, the OFF switch line. She pinned Lore's card there, too. "A house is only a good machine when it forces us to bring chairs." We looked at the sentence the way people look at a portrait of the aunt who raised them and then died. I packed. East 3 returned my objects to their right weight. The study behind the seam, my green, my cheap desk, stayed, but the teacup was gone, replaced by an empty saucer. I understood. The room isn't a shrine. It's a record. It doesn't keep your habits. It keeps your nouns. Before I left, I went to the stair. The ledger slot looked ordinary now, ridiculous even, brass in a basement. I slid one last card in, without stamp or ceremony, because I didn't need the house to count this for me. I will leave some rooms unopened. The slot took it without comment. Good machines don't demand applause. At the door, Bulmer shook my hand like a supervisor and hugged me like an aunt. "You've done enough," she said. "Go write about a warehouse with good bones and bad money. We'll keep the verbs." Rusk walked me to the drive. "I'll text when I have to testify," he said, matter of fact, as if testimony were groceries. "You can come watch me tell the truth badly. I'll bring a chair," I said. Noelle leaned in the doorway with her hands in her pockets and the bank key tapping once against her thigh like a metronome slowing. "Come back when we repaint," she said. "I'd like you to pick a color with me I won't overthink and hate." "Not fishbelly green," I said. "God, no," she said and smiled. Mercer stood back and let the women talk. That was his last sentence that day. At the bottom of the drive, the gateposts looked tired in the right way. Work, not defeat. I sent a message to Inez. It was a house that wanted to be a library. It learned, and turned my phone over so the hill could fall behind me without having to pose. On the plane, I took out my notebook and wrote the only paragraph in this job I knew would outlast the trend piece and the op-ed and the grant report. Some buildings don't ask to be forgiven. They ask to be kept. If you are lucky, the machine you inherit comes with an index and a drawer. It will make rooms when you lie. It will hush when you bring chairs. It will keep a ledger that shuffles on the walls at 3:15 and never learns to clap. It will let you say a sentence and file it and go make dinner without turning your grief into theater. Keep water handy. Open a window. If it starts to enjoy itself, turn off the lights. When I landed, the text was waiting from Rusk, arraignment set. He pled not guilty. We're going to court. If you want a seat, aisle side. Good for leaving to breathe. A minute later, a second text. A photograph of a little bell on a convenience store counter, new brass, finger-shaped dent already beginning. He'd paid for it himself. Back on the hill, they tell me, the house still builds a room every so often. A seam appears, a chair is carried, a card gets stamped, a glass of water sweats onto a saucer. The confessional drawer sticks on humid days. The gardener cut the U into a shape the trustees don't recognize as expensive, and birds live. The chalkboard stays posted. The ribbon stair creaks less when men try to make speeches on it. A bowl by the back door now holds a black pebble with a brass eye, and people who work there know how to use it without asking.
No tours.
No tickets. You can smell bread in the kitchen sometimes when the wind is right. They say the mobile has learned the trick of moving only when no one watches, which is the nicest thing a piece of brass can do. And if you press your palm to the plaster in East 3 at 3:15, you can feel nothing at all. Only the decency of a wall that, for once, is being a wall. That is my favorite part. Not the secrets. Not the rooms. The machine's decision to be ordinary, which is the hardest work a haunted house will ever do. Epilogue, chairs, water, windows. The hill learned a steadier breath after I left. No miracle, just a building that had been taught a handful of human verbs and chose, more days than not, to use them in order. Notice, gather, say, file, rest. Noelle texts when it matters and almost never when it doesn't. A photo of the chalkboard under the ribbon stair. Archive protocol in her careful hand, OFF switch. Chairs/water/windows/lights added beneath like a note you stick to a fridge because it keeps the kitchen honest. Another photo of the black pebble, mute, hanging on its little hook by the service closet. Someone's taped a tag to it, NO Rooms for Children, in the same tidy capitals Laura used when she wanted the steel to behave. Bulmer writes less and does more as ever. She mailed me a photocopy of the ledger index she keeps in the security office, a thin 3-ring binder labeled archive, cards, index, between the breaker schedule and the radio checklist. In the margin, she penciled, "Good machine, bad God," then folded the page around a tea bag that smells like lemon and permission. She says the confessional's drawer sticks in humidity. She sands it on Sundays. The house purrs. Rusk sent one message with nouns that don't belong to mansions: arraignment, chain of custody, continuance, and one photograph of a brand new brass bell on a convenience store counter, a small dent already forming where fingers learn to land. On the back, in felt tip, "Ariadne, we're not done." He drops in at the house when the work gets knotted, writes one sentence at the elbow, stamps the time, and goes back to court without flourish. The confessional likes him for it. Mercer discovered that a codicil can be a leash. He hired a lawyer who dislikes romance and got the county recorder to enter the house, capital H, by way of its manager as owner of the archive. The foundation tried, twice, to propose a gala with acoustics. Both times the chalkboard made them feel foolish. On his desk, he keeps an index card that reads, "No tickets. No tours. Chairs cost money." He has not framed it. That seems important. Gigi cuts his hair in the pantry now. Cass leans on the counter and argues about architecture school and where to put the phone bowl in a world that refuses to put anything down. After appointments, Gigi walks the long gallery and never touches the paneling. The house returns the courtesy. Once a month more if the weather forgets itself. The building makes a room. Not a spectacle. A seam, a small door, a space that remembers a mistake until a sentence is written and water is drunk and the card is slid into the wall. Sometimes the room is kind, an office with a chair that fits a back better after a line is confessed. Sometimes it isn't, tile too white, a latch drawn from a bad year. Always a witness sits. Always, the room unlearns itself when the verb is right. The ribbon stair still creaks when a speech tries to happen on it. That's not haunting. That's engineering choosing sides. I went back in late summer with a tin of cookies that broke too easily and therefore did their job. The hedges had survived heat and trustees. The mobile over the atrium had learned how to drift without implying metaphor. East 3 smelled like clean linen and newly sharpened pencils. My little study behind the seams still existed, but the teacup had gone, replaced by an empty saucer. The room isn't a shrine, it's a record. It keeps nouns, not habits. We held a reading that evening because a contractor had written, "I rounded the hours" on a card, and then brought his brothers to hear him say it out loud. Bulmer stamped and slid. Noel opened 2 windows. The house listened without trying to sing. When the last chair was folded, I wrote one line I had known I'd been saving. I came back because some rooms deserve witnesses, and fed it to the ledger slot behind the stair without a stamp. Good machines don't require applause. On my last morning, the light fell just right in the north gallery, neither flattery nor interrogation. The chalkboard kept its rules. A glass of water on the service table sweated a little circle onto a saucer. The confessional drawer stayed shut. The house minded its breath. If you put your palm flat on the plaster outside East 3 at 3:15 now, you feel nothing but cool wall. That is my favorite part. A haunted house learning the hardest trick, being ordinary on purpose, because a handful of people keep bringing chairs, pouring water, opening windows, and telling the truth in one sentence at a time.